Hello friends, I am Mr. Ghost, and I am here to help you today. I know, you use these videos to fall asleep. So, before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from, and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable, and relax. I moved into the old condominium last month. I wanted a fresh start, and the rent was cheap. The first thing I noticed was the stale smell in the hallway. The paint on the walls looked cracked. Every time I walked, I heard creaking under my feet. Some doors had odd scratches along the frames. I didn't think much of it at the time, I just wanted a quiet place to settle and unpack. I had no idea what waited for me underneath this building. On my first night, I stood in the kitchen, looking at the outdated cabinets. One drawer seemed stuck, so I yanked it until it opened with a small snap. Inside, I found some old utensils, a roll of plastic wrap, and a single key on a thin metal ring. That key looked rusted, with patches of discoloration on the metal. I tested it in my front door, bedroom door, and even my bathroom door out of curiosity. It didn't fit anywhere. It felt heavy in my hand, and for some reason it made me uneasy. I tossed it back into the drawer and went to bed. The next morning, I woke up to a faint drip from the kitchen faucet. I stared at the stained ceiling. I felt a bit unsettled. I couldn't stop thinking about the key. I walked back into the kitchen and opened the drawer again. I picked up the key, turned it around in my fingers and ran my thumb over the rough edges. I told myself it was just a key, but it gave me a strange feeling in my stomach. After breakfast, I went outside and looked around the hallway again. I saw a few neighbors, but they were in a hurry. One older man nodded at me, but seemed to avoid eye contact. During the day, I tried to focus on my work. I do most of my tasks online, so I stayed in my apartment typing away on my laptop. Every now and then, I caught myself glancing at the drawer with the key. I felt drawn to it as if it had a pull. Late that afternoon, I decided to explore the building. I walked to each floor, checking the doors at the end of the hallways. Most were labeled with storage signs or electrical panels. Nothing looked especially secretive or locked with a big padlock. A few doors were unlocked and revealed empty supply closets. Others had large locks, but they were clearly for the maintenance staff. I found the building's manager in a cramped office next to the lobby. Her name was Marta, and she looked tired. I asked if she knew of any locked room in the building that required a special key. She shrugged and said she had no idea, then asked if I was having any plumbing problems. I said no. She told me the building was old, and most of the basement areas were closed off years ago because they were unsafe. Then she excused herself to handle some papers. The word basement stuck in my mind. I hadn't seen any clear sign of a basement door in my earlier walk. I figured it might be hidden somewhere. That evening, I walked down to the ground floor and looked around the corners of the hallway near the elevator. I noticed a door that blended with the wall's color. It had a sign that looked worn off. The letters were too faded to read. The knob didn't budge. I peered through a narrow gap where the frame met the door. It looked dark inside, but I could feel a draft. I tried my apartment key, but it didn't fit. I then tried the new key from the kitchen drawer, but it slipped in only halfway. I jiggled it, nothing. I heard metal scraping, and I got a whiff of something damp. I gave up and headed back upstairs, frustrated. That night, I lay awake thinking about that locked door. My apartment felt stuffy, so I got up, opened the window, and let in some air. My mind wandered back to the basement. It occurred to me that maybe the lockdown there was broken or rusted, and I just needed a longer push. The next day, I went to a hardware store a few blocks away. I bought a small can of lubricant oil. I figured it might help loosen a stiff lock. In the afternoon, I went back to the mysterious door. I made sure no one was watching. I knelt down and sprayed a small amount of lubricant into the keyhole. I inserted the old key from the kitchen drawer and tried again. It went in deeper this time, but not smoothly. I twisted it with some force. I felt something shift, but it still wouldn't open. I kept turning, and suddenly the key jammed. I pulled it out, covered in brownish residue. My hands shook a bit. I forced myself to breathe slowly and wiped the key clean on my jeans. Then I heard footsteps approaching, so I hurried back upstairs. Over the next few days, I tried not to think too much about the door. I unpacked more boxes in my apartment, trying to settle in, meet a few neighbors, and get comfortable. But every time I passed through the lobby, I felt drawn to the hidden door near the elevator. I never saw anyone going in or out. I heard a rumor from an older resident about a sub-basement that had been used decades ago. He mentioned something about a clinic or a lab in the building's early history, but said it had been shut down for safety reasons. That made me curious. Late one night, I decided to make another attempt. I walked downstairs wearing a thick jacket with a hood. The hallway lights were dim. The building was quiet except for the hum of the old elevator motor. I listened for any movement. When it sounded clear, I crouched by the door again. I inserted the key carefully. I felt the lock catch. I twisted the key, and the lock made a loud click. My heart pounded. I turned the doorknob and the door creaked open. A cold draft hit my face. I stepped inside and closed the door behind me. The stairwell beyond was dark. The only light came from a weak bulb overhead. I walked down a narrow set of steps. The air smelled damp and stale. Water dripped somewhere, echoing against concrete. My footsteps were loud on the old steps. When I reached the bottom, I found another metal door. This one had a chain wrapped around the handle. I tried the key there. It slid in easily. I turned it, but the chain still blocked the door. I fiddled with it until the chain dropped to the floor with a clang. I exhaled. My palms were sweating. I pushed the door open. I found myself in a wide corridor with cracked tiles on the floor. The walls had peeling paint and stains that looked like old water damage. I saw a few flickering fluorescent lights overhead, which made a faint buzzing noise. I slowly walked forward, hearing my own breathing. My shoulders were tense. I noticed doors on each side of the corridor. Some were ajar, revealing small rooms filled with dusty tables and chairs. Others were locked, with broken glass windows on the doors. As I moved deeper, I spotted a larger room at the end of the corridor. I stepped inside and saw a row of metal cabinets along the walls. In the center, there were old medical instruments laid out on a rusted table, scalpels, forceps, syringes, and jars with cracked labels. Dust covered everything. A thick layer of grime coated the surfaces. The smell in there was musty, like no one had touched it for decades. My stomach twisted. I wiped my forehead and tried to stay calm. I opened one of the cabinets. Inside I found stacks of papers, some yellowed and brittle. The text was handwritten, full of abbreviations and scribbles. It looked like someone had taken notes on experiments or procedures. Many pages were incomplete, with random numbers and times written in the margins. A few had references to injuries or treatments. There was no clear explanation of what had happened here. I heard a faint noise, almost like a muffled groan. I froze. I strained my ears, but everything went silent. My heart thumped in my chest. I clenched my fists. My instincts told me to leave, but my curiosity kept me there. I moved to the next cabinet. The door squeaked when I opened it. More papers, more instruments, and some small jars with odd liquid residue inside. I tried not to imagine what they once held. As I flipped through the pages, I heard the noise again. It sounded like a distant moan. I felt the hairs on my neck stand up. I swallowed hard. Part of me wanted to shout out, but my throat felt tight. I looked around the room. I didn't see any other exit or any sign of movement. My palms started sweating again, though I tried to control my breathing. I took a few steps toward a corner where I saw a row of tool storage lockers. They were labeled with small metal plaques, but the words had faded. One locker was open, revealing an empty interior except for a torn coat on a hanger. I shut it, and it creaked loudly. I thought I heard a shuffle behind me. I swung around, but there was nothing. I stood still, listening. The corridor outside was dark. I felt short of breath. I grabbed a random set of notes from a cabinet and stuffed them into my jacket pocket. Then I headed back to the corridor, shining my phone's flashlight around. The walls seemed to swallow the light. Every step I took echoed. My pulse pounded in my temples. I heard the moan again, clearer this time. It sounded like it came from somewhere behind the walls. The pitch rose and fell, then faded. I glanced around, trying to see if there was any hidden passage. The corridor looked solid. The doors were either locked or led to rooms that had no one in them. I told myself it might just be an old pipe or air vent. Still, it didn't sound mechanical. It sounded almost human, but I had no proof. My hands trembled. I felt my shoulders tighten. My skin felt cold. I followed the noise, or at least the direction I thought it came from. It led me to a short hallway branching off from the main corridor. The ceiling there was lower, and the floor was wetter. I nearly slipped on a patch of slick concrete. At the end of that hallway, there was another locked door. The handle was corroded, the paint on the door flaking away. I tested my key, expecting it not to fit, but it slid in easily. This time, the lock gave way with a loud screech. I pushed the door open. My flashlight revealed a small room with more metal cabinets and a single gurney in the center. The mattress on the gurney was stained and torn. A thick layer of dust covered it. I stepped inside, scanning the space. My chest felt tight. Something about this room felt worse than the others. The temperature seemed colder. I moved the beam of my flashlight around, checking the walls. I saw more scattered papers on a table. I approached them, flipping through the top sheet. The handwriting was messy. It looked like notes on procedures performed on patients. Sentences cut off abruptly. One page mentioned a date from decades ago. Then I heard another moan. It sounded like it was coming from the wall to my left. I moved closer, pressing my ear to the cold concrete. I heard a soft thumping, then another groan. My breath caught in my throat. I tried to figure out if there was a hidden room behind the wall. I tapped the concrete with my knuckles. It felt solid. My phone's battery was getting low. I could see the percentage dropping. The flashlight grew dimmer. I felt a surge of panic. I realized I was deep in the basement, alone, and hearing strange sounds. I decided I needed to leave before my phone died. I turned around, took a few steps, and felt a vibration under my feet. It was subtle, like a faint tremor in the floor. It pulsed once, then again. I knelt down and placed my palm on the tile. I felt a slight rumble as if something under the floor was moving or waiting. The moan came once more, echoing in the small room. I stood up quickly, my legs shaking. I hurried back into the corridor, almost stumbling as I turned the corner. I thought I saw a shadow shift at the end of the hallway, but my flashlight was too weak to show much. I kept moving, glancing behind me every few steps. I heard the moan again, distant and muffled. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat. My fingers felt numb from gripping my phone. At one point, I swore I heard something scrape against a wall. My nerves were on edge, and I almost dropped the key. By the time I got back to the stairwell, I was sweating. The air felt thicker, like it was harder to breathe. I raced up the stairs 2 at a time. I reached the door at the top and fumbled with the knob. It swung open, and I stepped into the main floor hallway. The lights felt too bright compared to the basement. I stood there panting. The door slammed shut behind me. I locked it and listened. All I heard was the quiet hum of the old building. I put the key in my pocket and walked to the elevator. I got inside and hit the button for my floor. When I reached my apartment, I locked myself inside and turned on every light. I paced around trying to calm down. My shirt clung to my back, damp with sweat. I took out the notes I had grabbed and spread them on my kitchen table. As I scanned them, I saw references to treatments, patients, and something called deep cell. There were mentions of vibrations in the floor, and tests on physical responses. All the notes ended abruptly, with no conclusion. I sat there catching my breath. My mind raced with questions. I kept hearing that moaning sound in my head. I could almost feel the vibration again. It unsettled me. I wanted to figure out what had happened down there, but I also felt sick at the thought of returning. The rusty key on my table caught my attention. It was covered in dried lubricant and flakes of rust. A chill ran through me. I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I thought I heard footsteps in the hallway. I jolted awake a few times, unsure if the sounds were real or just in my head. In the morning, I considered talking to the manager, but then I realized she might just lock the basement again and never answer my questions. Or she might ask me what I was doing down there in the first place. All day, I kept remembering the trembling in the floor. The old instruments, notes in locked rooms haunted me. Faint echoes of that moan lingered in my mind. My gut told me something else was hidden behind that concrete. Whether it was a person, an old machine, or something else entirely, I didn't know. But I felt certain I hadn't been alone down there. For now, I have the key, I have the note, and I know how to open the door. Yet, I'm not sure if I want to go back. There's something about that vibration that makes me feel like I'm in over my head. I can't stop thinking about it. A heaviness settled in my chest, like the building was pressing down on me, reminding me of what's beneath. I don't know if I'll find the courage to return alone. But I also can't stop wondering if whatever is down there is waiting for me. And if it is, then I'm the only one who can find it. Until then, I'm keeping the key in my drawer. I can't bring myself to throw it away. Every time I look at it, my stomach tightens. I haven't touched it since yesterday. I keep asking myself whether I imagined those moans or if there really was something in the basement. I can't be sure. The only thing I know is that I felt something vibrate under the floor, and I heard noises I can't explain. Something is down there, and it hasn't been touched for decades. I'm trying to convince myself that I'm safe up here, in my apartment, with my door locked. But I can still hear the building settle at night, and I wonder if the vibrations are creeping upward little by little. I never planned on sharing this with anyone, but I can't keep it to myself anymore. Something is happening on my rooftop terrace, and I can't explain it in any simple way. I'm not looking for sympathy or advice. I just need to lay out the facts as plainly as I can because it's taken over my routine and my peace of mind. Every afternoon I go up there to water my plants. I used to find that half hour relaxing. Now it's the tensest part of my day. I live in a small apartment building with 6 floors. The rooftop has a clear view of the city lights, a few old chairs, and my collection of potted plants. I keep them arranged near the edges so they can get enough sun. I started watering them about a year ago when the building management decided it was fine for residents to keep personal items upstairs. It became my little escape. I'd finish work, grab the watering can, head up the stairs, and spend some quiet minutes breathing fresh air. One particular afternoon about 2 months ago, I noticed something odd. While I was pouring water into a row of succulents, I felt a sudden chill on the back of my neck. It wasn't a slight temperature drop. It felt like someone had opened a freezer door right behind me. At first I assumed the wind was picking up, so I turned around. The air was still, with no visible gusts or movement. I shrugged it off, but then I heard a soft tapping on the ceramic tiles. It sounded like footsteps, but very light. I spun around again, checking all corners of the terrace. Nobody was there. I walked around and looked behind the short wall near the entrance, but found nothing out of place. I felt uneasy, but told myself it was just my imagination. I finished watering the plants and went back to my apartment. I usually read or watch TV to unwind, but that night I replayed the moment in my mind. The tapping had sounded too distinct to be some random noise. It reminded me of someone walking very carefully in shoes that barely made a sound, yet still touched the floor at a steady pace. The next day I went up as usual. My first surprise was a couple of clay pots that had shifted to a different part of the terrace. They weren't just turned at a slight angle. They were several feet away from their original spot. One pot was even closer to the opposite wall. I looked around, half expecting to see someone up there with me. But again, I was alone. The building manager never goes up there unless there's a maintenance issue. Other residents rarely use that space. I placed the pots back where I remembered they should be, watered them, and left. I tried to put it out of my head, but it happened again the day after. This time one of the chairs was flipped upside down. It was an old metal chair with some chipped paint. It's not heavy, but it's not light enough for the wind to knock over like that. I stood there staring at it, waiting for some explanation to pop into my mind. I couldn't think of any rational reason. I checked the floor for any sign of tampering or scraping, but everything looked normal. I looked around me, feeling my skin prickle with goosebumps. Over the next few days, I began to expect these minor disturbances. Sometimes a pot was moved. Sometimes a chair was tilted or turned to face the other way. The succulent rows stayed in place, but the bigger plants near the walls were always shifted around. I found myself scanning every corner, checking behind the door to the stairwell, and listening intently for any noise. Every so often, I'd hear faint creaks or clicks that sounded like they were right next to me, but I never saw anyone. I started to hurry through my watering routine, my heartbeat pounding. I wanted to get in and out quickly. I couldn't believe I was scared of an empty terrace, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was there. About a week into this strange pattern, I decided to do something more concrete. I have a small voice recorder that I bought a few years ago for a project. It's not expensive or fancy, but it picks up sounds decently well. One afternoon before I started watering, I slipped it behind a row of potted herbs. I left it running, then went about my routine. I talked out loud a bit, hoping that if someone was hiding there, they might respond. Nobody answered. After I finished, I left the terrace, locked the door to the stairwell, and came back about 20 minutes later to retrieve the recorder. Listening to that first recording felt like sifting through random noises. I heard my own voice, the sound of water pouring, and a few faint clicks. Then, about halfway through, I heard something that made me pause. There was a low, raspy sound. It was uneven, like someone breathing through a clogged nose. I cranked up the volume and replayed it. The breath was definitely there, and it wasn't mine. It sounded close to the microphone, like whoever it was had crouched right next to the herbs. My throat went dry, and I felt a tightness in my stomach. I tried to see if there was any other clue, but it ended with a faint shuffle, then silence. I couldn't sleep well that night. I kept picturing someone lurking behind the planters while I was just a few feet away, watering the succulents, oblivious. The next day I repeated the process, but this time I placed the recorder under a chair in the corner. I made sure to angle it so the microphone faced the center of the terrace. I watered the plants for a bit longer and tried to act natural. Nothing stood out while I was up there. I left, waited again, and returned to grab the recorder. This second recording had more of that irregular breathing, except it was clearer. I also heard a faint whisper. I swear it sounded like someone saying my name. My name isn't very common, so it gave me chills. That whisper was slow, barely audible, but I recognized it. My hands started shaking. I paused the audio and pressed play again, my heart pounding in my chest. I couldn't mistake it. It was definitely my name. That was the moment I became sure there was someone or something on the terrace with me. I sat in my living room, the recorder resting on my coffee table, still on. I couldn't think of anything else. The next few afternoons I felt dread every time I thought about going up there. But the plants needed water. I told myself I wouldn't let fear control my routines. So I forced myself to keep the same schedule. I placed the recorder in different spots, under a folded patio umbrella between two large pots, and even taped it to the inside of the stairwell door. Each recording picked up that same soft breathing and the same whisper. Sometimes it was just once. Sometimes it was repeated in short bursts. Always my name. I considered showing the recordings to someone else, but I didn't want to seem like a fool. I tried telling a neighbor about strange noises, but I left out the part about the whisper. He just nodded and said something about wind drafts. Then he changed the subject. He didn't seem interested. I stopped bringing it up after that. At one point, I tried to catch it in the act. I climbed the stairs quietly one afternoon without my watering can and stood behind the door. I listened through the gap at the bottom, hoping I'd hear footsteps or something moving the pots. I heard nothing. After 10 minutes, I slowly opened the door and slipped onto the terrace, staying near the walls. I felt my palms sweating. I checked each corner, even crouched down to see if anyone was hiding behind the planters. The place was empty. The sun was bright, and everything looked normal. No chairs knocked over, no pots out of place. I stood there, tense, waiting for something to happen. Nothing did. I watered the plants, feeling foolish, and tried to relax my shoulders. Right when I was about to leave, I heard a sharp scraping sound. It came from the far side of the terrace behind the row of bigger pots. I froze. The scraping was quick, like someone dragging a piece of metal across the floor. I walked slowly toward that area, barely breathing. I peered around the last pot, expecting to see something. There was nothing there, but I saw fresh scratch marks on the tile, a few feet long. They weren't there before. The marks looked shallow and I couldn't figure out what caused them. My heart was pounding so hard I thought I'd pass out. I backed away and hurried down the stairs. That night I sat in my kitchen and tried to think this through in a straightforward way. Pots moving, a chair flipping, strange breathing on the recorder, a whisper saying my name, and fresh scratches on the tiles. None of it made sense. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe someone found a way to mess with me. But what's the motive? Who has that kind of time? This isn't a prank that happens once and stops. It's been going on for weeks. The next day, I decided to address it directly. I went up with my recorder, placed it on the table, and said out loud, "I know you're here. Can you show yourself?" My voice cracked a little. I was scared, but tried to keep it steady. I stood there for a minute, waiting. The air felt colder than usual. I heard a faint rustling like cloth rubbing against something, but I saw nothing. I said again, "I just want to understand what you want."
Are you listening?
Another minute passed. Nothing. My hands were trembling. I picked up the recorder and left. When I played back that file, I almost dropped my phone. The rustling was louder on the recording. Right after I spoke, there was a soft reply. It sounded like a long exhale, followed by a single word. It was distorted, but it might have been here. I can't be certain, but that's how it sounded to me, like here. I broke out in a cold sweat. I tried to stand up from my couch. My legs felt weak. I had the urge to run out of my apartment and never go back. Despite my fear, I kept returning. I still had to water my plants, and I was determined not let this thing chase me away. Each afternoon, the atmosphere felt heavier. I'd walk onto the terrace, my ears tuned to every small noise. Sometimes I'd hear a soft step behind me. Sometimes I'd see a plant pot in a different spot than where I left it the day before. Once I found a single footprint in the thin layer of dust near the wall. It looked like a shoe print, but incomplete. The toes were smudged, as if the foot had shifted in place. I placed my own foot next to it and noticed it was slightly smaller than mine. That discovery made me uneasy. It hinted at a real physical presence, not just a noise in my head. I started sleeping with earplugs, hoping that would help me get some rest. My stomach was in knots every night. I'd wake up before sunrise, sometimes drenched in sweat, unable to remember my dreams. During the day, I tried to keep a normal routine at work, but I felt distracted, always thinking about what was waiting for me at home. After a while, I even considered getting rid of the plants, but that seemed like running away. One afternoon, I found a new chair in the middle of the terrace. It was one of those plastic chairs that had been stored in a corner for months. I'd never touched it before. Now it sat in plain view, facing the row of planters. I walked around it, half expecting someone to jump out. I didn't see or hear anything, so I decided to sit down. The chair felt stable, and I found myself looking at the area like I was at a theater, waiting for a show. Nothing happened for several minutes. Eventually a chill ran across my arms. I heard that faint breathing again. Only this time it sounded much closer. I turned, saw no one, and stood up. My heart hammered. I said out loud, "I can hear you. I know you're here." My voice echoed a bit. The breathing seemed to stop, or maybe I just couldn't hear it anymore. I felt nauseous, so I left. Now every time I'm on that terrace, I expect the unexpected. Some days, nothing unusual happens. Other days, pots are moved. Or I hear that whisper on my recordings. I haven't shown them to anybody else. In worried they'll think I'm unstable. I try to act normal around neighbors, greeting them in the hallway and pretending everything is fine. But the truth is, I feel like something is always watching me up there. It doesn't attack me or chase me, but it doesn't go away. It's always just out of sight, leaving signs that it exists. A few days ago, I found a large wooden chair upside down again, right next to a big plastic pot I keep near the edge. I checked the recorder, which I had taped under a nearby table. The audio was mostly quiet until I heard a long dragging sound, followed by that rough breathing. Then, clear as day, there was a muffled voice saying my name. I couldn't bring myself to listen to it more than once. My face flushed. My hands were shaking so badly that I had to sit down on the floor of my living room. I stared at the walls for a while, trying to calm down. I don't know what's going on. I still water my plants in the afternoon, but I move more carefully. My eyes dart around corners and my stomach churns. I keep my recorder running even though it freaks me out to hear whatever this is. I've learned that ignoring it won't make it go away. It's here, in my space, and it wants me to know that it's paying attention. Maybe it's trying to communicate, or maybe it just enjoys messing with me. I don't understand its intentions, and I'm not even sure if it matters. This is where I stand now. Every day I climb those stairs with a tightness in my chest. Every day, I wonder if it'll come face to face with whatever is breathing and whispering my name. But it never shows itself. It only leaves me clues and signs that it's right behind me listening. I can't explain it, and I can't prove it to anyone, unless they listen to the recordings. But even then, they'd probably think it's some weird interference, or a trick. I'm not lying. I don't have a reason to make this up. I just want some peace again. For now, all I can do is keep watering the plants and hope that one day this thing decides to leave me alone. Until then, it'll be up there every afternoon listening to its faint steps and feeling that cold breath on my neck. I never thought a single sound could make my heart pound the way it did on my first night in that house. I moved there to escape the noise of the city. I wanted complete silence so I could focus on writing new music. I was tired of cramped apartments and neighbors who stomped around all day and night. I wanted stillness, a big empty place where I could blast my guitar if I wanted, or play a soft riff on my keyboard without worrying about anyone listening. I needed time to think, to explore melodies in my own head. But what I found was the strangest sound I've ever heard, coming from a place that should have been empty. I'd found the house through a local ad online. It wasn't expensive. The real estate agent said the property had sat empty for years, so the owner just wanted someone to cover basic costs. The place was big. It had 2 floors and an attic. The yard was overgrown with weeds, and the windows looked dusty from the outside. When I walked in, the floors creaked under my feet. Everything smelled stale, like it needed fresh air. I saw paint peeling in the corner of the living room ceiling. The furniture was old, probably left by previous tenants. It fit my needs, though. There was a large room where I could set up my equipment. There were no neighbors nearby. I'd have had no distractions. I thought it was perfect. On the first day, I moved in a few suitcases and my instruments. I spent most of the afternoon tidying up. I wiped down the counters, vacuumed the floors, and opened the windows to air the place out. I set up my keyboard in a corner of the living room where a little sunlight came in through a cracked window. I kept my guitar and amp in a closet for the moment, because I didn't feel like making noise right away. I wanted to get a feel for the house first. The agent told me the electricity worked fine, but the light fixtures were old and some bulbs flickered. I tested them and saw that a few did flicker slightly. It didn't bother me. That night, I fell asleep on a couch in the living room. I was too tired to climb the stairs. Around 3 a.m., I woke up. My eyes snapped open, and I couldn't tell why at first. I heard a sound. It was faint, like a tune coming through a wall. It was soft, sort of like a gentle hum. I thought maybe I was half dreaming, but I sat up, and the hair on my arm stood on end. I couldn't make out the exact notes, but it sounded like someone was playing an old recording. It was soothing, but it made me uneasy, because I knew I was alone in the house. My rental agreement said nobody else would be there. There was no mention of old equipment in the attic or anything like that. I got up slowly. My feet were cold against the wooden floor. I walked around the living room listening. The tune sounded like it was coming from above, maybe from the ceiling or the next floor. I looked at the stairs in the hallway. The darkness on the second floor felt thick, like a curtain. I wasn't sure if I should go up there in the middle of the night, but the melody kept going and never wavered. It didn't grow louder. It stayed in that low volume, as though it was seeping through the house's walls. I decided not to go upstairs that first night. Instead, I went to the kitchen, got a glass of water, and tried to relax. I listened for the sound again. After a few more seconds, it stopped. I waited a bit, heard nothing else, and then told myself it was probably some old pipe or a weird draft. I went back to the couch and tried to sleep. My heart was beating fast, but after a while, I dozed off again. The next day, I tried to ignore what I'd heard, but it kept creeping into my thoughts. I sat at my keyboard trying to work on a new piece. Every time I pressed a few keys, I paused and listened, worried I might hear that melody again. I told myself I needed to check the attic just to be sure there wasn't a radio or something up there, but part of me felt uneasy about it. I spent the day messing around with chords and a bit of guitar, but my creativity felt blocked. My mind kept wandering back to that faint tune. Around 10 that night, I decided to head to bed early. I climbed the stairs to the second floor, walked down a dark hallway, and found the bedroom I'd chosen. I lay down on an old bed with a mattress that sagged in the middle. The sheets smelled a bit musty, but I was too tired to care. I turned off the light. The house was dead silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator downstairs. My eyes got heavy, and soon I drifted off. I woke up again at 3 in the morning. This time the melody was clearer, and it seemed to float right outside my door. My arms felt tense. I sat up, turned on the lamp by my bed, and listened. I recognized the tune from the night before. It was steady, slow, like some old lullaby on a record player. The sound felt oddly warm yet unsettling, because I couldn't figure out how it was happening. I stood, slid my feet into the slippers I'd left by the bed, and went into the hallway. I saw a set of narrow stairs at the end leading up to the attic. The melody seemed to call me that way, though I tried not to think about it like that. It was just a strange noise, I told myself. I walked carefully, my steps making soft creaks on the floorboards. My chest felt tight. My mouth was dry. I had to force myself to climb the attic stairs. The air got colder as I went up. My eyes took a moment to adjust to the darkness at the top. I found a light switch on the side, flicked it on, and saw a single bulb hanging from the ceiling. It flickered a few times before it stayed lit. Dust floated in the air. The attic was cluttered with boxes, old furniture, and a big sheet covering what looked like an upright mirror. But in the corner near a slanted window I saw a gramophone. It was covered in a layer of dust. I saw its metal horn and the wooden base. It looked like it hadn't been touched in decades, yet the turntable was spinning. I swear I saw it rotating even though there was no visible record. That soft melody was coming from it. There was no needle pressing down, and no vinyl in sight. My throat tightened. I felt goosebumps forming on my arms. My breathing got faster. I walked over and reached out to the gramophone's crank handle. The handle felt cold. Dust covered my fingers. I tried to stop the turntable, but it didn't budge. It felt like a steady motor was pushing it along, except the crank wasn't turning. I tried flipping whatever switches I could find on the gramophone, but nothing responded. The melody kept playing. It sounded clear, as though it were being played at full volume right next to me. I said, "Come on, stop," under my breath, like an idiot. Of course it didn't stop. My heart was thumping in my chest. My palms were sweaty. I decided to unplug it. I looked for a cable or cord, but there wasn't one. It was an old wind-up gramophone, so there was no power cable at all. Yet, it kept spinning. The music seemed to wash over me in waves. My head felt light, and I started to sway. I snapped out of it and backed away. I stood there for a moment, staring at the gramophone. I couldn't make any sense of it. The attic walls were lined with old papers and rickety shelves. I saw a few music sheets scattered on a nearby table. They looked faded, with notes written in handwriting I didn't recognize. I walked over and picked them up. They were incomplete, as if the composer had stopped halfway through. The notes looked chaotic, like someone was in a rush to get the ideas down before they forgot. I felt a strange urge to finish them, even though I'd never seen them before. The melody from the gramophone seemed to match the style of the notation on these pages. I got a chill up my spine. I wanted to leave, but curiosity pulled me in. I thought maybe these sheets were part of a larger composition. I scanned them, looking for anything that made sense. The notes were scattered, but I recognized a structure that might tie into the melody I was hearing. I tried to piece it together in my mind. It was tough to focus. The constant sound from the gramophone made it hard to think clearly. My hands shook, and I realized I was breathing in short, quick bursts. I told myself to calm down. I decided to go back to bed and deal with it in the morning. I glanced at the gramophone one last time. It kept spinning, ignoring me. I turned off the light, backed away, and went downstairs. When I reached my bedroom, I shut the door and slid a small trunk in front of it. The idea of it made me feel slightly better. I listened for the melody from my bed, but I couldn't hear it. Eventually, I fell asleep out of sheer exhaustion. The next morning, I ate a quick breakfast and gathered my courage. I went back to the attic, half expecting the gramophone to be silent. But when I walked in, it was still spinning with that same haunting tune. I felt my chest tighten again. I approached it and tried to remove the turntable. It didn't budge. I tried lifting the entire machine. It was heavier than it looked. The handle dug into my palm, and I almost dropped it. It kept playing even though I tilted it slightly. Dust fell off the sides. I set it back down. I decided to open the attic window. I needed fresh air. I coughed from all the dust swirling around. The melody never stopped. I looked at the sheet music again. I felt a strange pull to study the notes. I took them downstairs so I could examine them in better light. As I worked through the lines, I noticed how some sections matched the tune almost exactly. Then there were empty bars that seemed to lead somewhere but never concluded. I felt compelled to complete them as if the lines were calling me to do it. I didn't like that feeling, but I also couldn't ignore it. I sat at my keyboard, set the pages on the stand, and tried to play the piece as far as it was written. It matched the melody from the attic, note for note. Each chord progression was the same. Each rest fell in the same place. But then I reached the incomplete section. My fingers hovered over the keys, and I paused. My mind started racing with ideas. I felt a tightness in my chest, like I shouldn't mess with these notes. But I had to because the half-finished part stirred something in me. I wanted to see where the music would go. I started playing different chords. Each time I pressed a key, I remembered the spinning gramophone upstairs. My body felt tense, but I kept playing. My hands were a little shaky. After a few attempts, I found a chord that fit the pattern. I wrote it down with a pencil. I spent most of the day like that, trying to fill in the blank measures. I was anxious, but I couldn't stop. I took short breaks to drink water or stretch my legs, but I avoided going back to the attic. I heard no music downstairs during the day, which made me uneasy in another way. It felt like the house was waiting for something. The sun started setting. I turned on a lamp near the keyboard. My eyes were burning from staring at the sheet for so long. I decided to stop for the evening, but I had some of the missing measures filled in. It felt like progress. I ate a sandwich for dinner and sat on the couch reading over the new music. I thought about how crazy this all seemed, but the reality was right there. I could still picture that gramophone spinning with no power source playing a tune that matched these sheets. Around midnight, I felt too tired to keep my eyes open, so I went back to the bedroom. I kept the door unlocked this time, thinking maybe I'd want to move around if the tune woke me up again. Sure enough, at around 3 in the morning I heard it. It was louder, like it was drifting through the hallway. My skin prickled, my heart pounded. I left my bed, walked into the hall, and once again climbed the attic steps. My legs felt shaky. When I entered the attic, the light bulb flickered more than usual, and the gramophone was playing that same melody. The pitch seemed slightly different, as if it had changed key. But I approached it. My hands were clammy. I tried to turn it off again, but nothing worked. I said, "What do you want from me?" out loud. I felt stupid talking to a machine, but I was desperate. As I stood there, I saw the new measures I wrote in my head, and I realized that the tune from the gramophone was now incorporating part of what I had written that day. It was no longer just the original piece that made my stomach drop. I realized the melody was changing along with my edits. I wondered if finishing the piece would make it stop, or if it would make something else happen. My pulse was racing, and my forehead was damp with sweat. I decided to try. I said fine, under my breath. I hurried downstairs, grabbed the sheet music, and brought it back to the attic. I placed it on a dusty table near the gramophone. I used an old pencil I found in one of the boxes and kept going with the notes. I played them in my head, matching them to the tune. My heartbeat was loud in my ears. The gramophone's music seemed to guide me. I didn't question it anymore. I just wrote what felt right until the end. I finished the last measure, set the pencil down, and my hand shook, causing the pencil to roll off the table. I stared at the sheet for a few seconds, waiting for something to happen. The gramophone stopped, the spinning turntable slowed to a halt, and I heard the gears clunk to a standstill. I let out a long breath and took a step back, feeling my arms feel weak. I walked over to the gramophone, brushed off some dust, and found it quiet. No humming, no hidden motor, nothing. I lifted the turntable cover. It was completely still. All I heard was my own breathing in that attic. I backed away, turned off the attic light, and went downstairs. I felt relief in my chest, but also unease. I tried not to overthink it. Later, I washed my face in the bathroom sink, then returned to bed and lay there staring at the ceiling in the dark. In the following days, I stayed in the house, focusing on my actual music. I set aside that odd composition for a while. The gramophone remained silent in the attic. Occasionally I went up there just to check. It never moved again. The sheet music I had completed stayed on the table. Sometimes I glanced at it, but I never played it in full on my keyboard. Something about it still gave me that uneasy feeling. I finished my work a few weeks later and left the house as soon as my lease ended. I never heard the gramophone's tune again, and I never asked the owner about it. I figured it was better to keep it to myself. The memory still makes my skin crawl sometimes, but I try not to dwell on it. I only know that for those nights I heard music that shouldn't have existed, played on an old machine that wasn't connected to anything, and I felt something in that attic, like a presence that pushed me to finish a piece that it couldn't finish on its own. I don't have an explanation, and I guess I don't need one. I just know that I composed something I never intended to write in a house, where silence was supposed to be my friend, but instead it led me to the strangest collaboration of my life. I remember the exact moment I saw that old leather-bound diary. It was resting on a high shelf in a dim corner of a neglected used bookstore. There was a faint smell of dust and old paper in the air, and my eyes kept drifting to this strange book with no title on the spine. It looked out of place, like it didn't belong there. I approached it because I felt a strong pull, like I was supposed to take it off the shelf. The owner watched me from behind his cluttered counter, barely blinking. When I asked about the diary, he muttered, Nobody's ever opened it. It just sits there. That line stuck with me. I felt a chill on the back of my neck. I wanted it anyway. I handed over a few bills, shoved the diary under my arm, and left without looking back. At home, I set the diary on my small kitchen table. I ran my hand over the cracked leather cover. It felt solid, but there was a certain dryness to it. The edges felt sharp, like it might crumble if I pressed too hard. There was no name, no date, no design, just plain brown leather with a slight discoloration in the corners. I opened it carefully, half expecting to see a name or some sort of dedication on the inside, but there was nothing. Every single page was blank. I flipped through all the pages, front to back. I didn't see a single word or mark, just empty off-white paper with the faint smell of old glue. I thought it might be a journal that someone never used. It didn't bother me. I actually liked the idea of having an old blank book. Something about the texture of the pages felt comforting. I closed it, set it on my bedside table, and forgot about it for a while. I went about my evening routine, cooked a quick meal, did some reading on my phone, and finally crawled into bed. I remember I slept quite well that night. In the morning, I woke up with my mind half on the diary. I glanced at my bedside table, saw it sitting there, and grabbed it. I opened it on my lap. At first, my eyes were still adjusting, so I blinked a few times. I noticed faint lines like handwriting scattered across the first 2 pages. I frowned because I knew those pages had been blank the night before. The handwriting looked old-fashioned, with sharp angles and heavy pressure on certain letters. It spelled out a short passage describing a scene that felt oddly familiar. I read the passage carefully. It mentioned a man who walked into a bookstore, found a diary, and brought it home. Then it cut off abruptly, as though the writer had been interrupted. I flipped to the next page, but it was blank again. My chest felt tight. I touched the ink and it felt dry. The words were in black, a bit faded but definitely there. I rubbed my hand over my face and took a few deep breaths. I double-checked my memory. The pages had been blank the night before. There was no doubt in my mind. I shook my head, closed the diary, and told myself that there had to be some rational explanation. I went to work that day but couldn't focus. My mind kept going back to that handwriting. I kept picturing those slanted letters, the abrupt ending. I felt nervous energy in my stomach. My hands felt restless, and I kept tapping my fingers on my desk. By the time I got home, the sun was already setting. I tossed my bag onto the couch and immediately went to check the diary. I opened it again and saw the same passage from that morning. Nothing else had appeared. That made me feel a bit calmer. Maybe I'd just been half asleep and overreacting. I set it back on the table near my bed and tried to distract myself with a movie on my laptop. That night, I had a hard time falling asleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those pages. I remembered the bookstore owner's words. Nobody's ever opened it. But that didn't explain anything. Eventually, I drifted off, with the diary still resting next to me. I woke up suddenly around 2 in the morning. My throat was dry. I felt an urge to check the diary. I reached for it, opened it under the weak light of my phone, and saw more writing. My heart started racing. I blinked a few times and kept reading. The new passage described a man lying in bed checking the pages of a strange diary. It said something about him feeling his heart pound in his chest, rubbing sweat from his forehead. It talked about how he didn't believe what he was seeing. I realized it was describing me, right at that moment, but in a weirdly distorted way. The text said I had a scar on my left hand, which isn't true, but it got every other detail right, down to the color of my sheets and the position of my phone on the nightstand. I felt a tingling sensation in my arms. My chest felt tight again, and I breathed slowly to calm myself. I didn't want to keep reading, but I couldn't stop. I read until I got to the last line, where it said, "He thinks this is only the beginning." Then it cut off. No more text. I noticed my hands were shaking. My breath felt shallow. My mouth tasted bitter. I had a strong urge to close the book and never open it again. But I also felt a pull, like I had to see what it would write next. It was 3 in the morning by the time I finally forced myself to lie down again. I couldn't sleep for a while. I stared at the ceiling, my heart thumping in my ears. The next morning, I was exhausted. My eyes stung from lack of sleep. I went to work in a daze. My coworkers asked if I was sick because I looked so tired. I just shrugged and said I'd had a rough night. I didn't want to tell anyone about the diary. feeling embarrassed, like they would think I was losing my mind. Throughout the day, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I replayed the details in my head. I kept remembering how the diary knew what I was doing at that exact moment. My hands trembled sometimes and I'd clenched them to hide the shaking. I tried to ignore the uneasy feeling in my gut. When I finally got back home, I stood in front of my bedroom door and hesitated, thinking about the diary sitting there. I went inside and saw it right where I had left it. My heart picked up speed again. I set my bag down, took off my jacket, and approached it slowly. There was a subtle smell of old paper in the air. I lifted the cover, turned the pages, and saw fresh text continuing from where it stopped during the night. It described my day at work, my exhaustion, and even mentioned that moment when my coworkers asked if I was sick. It got details right, like the color of my tie and the coffee stain on my desk. But it also added details that hadn't happened, like a conversation with a friend that I never had. It described me making a phone call during lunch to someone named John, which isn't a person I know. It was unnerving. It was half true, half strange. That unsettled me more than if it had been completely wrong. I felt a surge of adrenaline course through my body. My stomach twisted. I slammed the diary shut and stepped back. My heart thudded against my ribs. The room felt too small. I walked out to the living room, paced around, and tried to calm down. I told myself maybe there was some elaborate prank involved. Maybe the diary had some sort of hidden sensor or digital component that recorded my movements. But the writing looked like old-fashioned handwriting, not a printout. I told myself to think logically, but I didn't have any solid explanation. That night, I tried ignoring it. I left the diary on the kitchen counter and watched TV for a few hours. I made a simple dinner, but my hands kept shaking while I chopped vegetables. I ate standing up, not really tasting the food. By the time I went to bed, I felt drained. I knew I wasn't going to sleep well. I tossed and turned for a while, then drifted off. Around midnight, I jerked awake with a sudden rush of panic. I couldn't pinpoint what startled me, but I knew I wanted to check the diary again. My body felt tense, my neck stiff. I sat up, turned on the bedside lamp, and walked to the kitchen. The diary was closed right where I'd left it. I opened it, flipping to the most recent page. New writing had appeared. It described me waking up in a panic, coming to the kitchen, and reading the diary. It even mentioned the faint creak of my bedroom floorboards and the slight chill in the air. It was describing the present moment again. I read on, and the last lines talked about my hidden fear that I was losing control of my own life. It mentioned how I felt alone. It said that I was starting to doubt my own sanity. My chest tightened, and I realized I was breathing faster. My scalp prickled. I shut the diary, feeling a wave of dread in my stomach. The next few days passed in a blur. Each night, the diary would update. Each morning, I'd find more passages describing my actions. They weren't all accurate. Sometimes it mentioned me doing things I never did, like taking a long walk by the river or meeting someone at a cafe. But the scariest parts were the ones that lined up exactly with reality. It knew small personal details that I never shared with anyone. It wrote about my private fears, like the way I sometimes worry about failing at work, or the way I feel uneasy in dark, empty spaces. My nerves started to wear thin. I jumped at small noises, like the sound of water pipes or the wind outside my apartment. My back felt tight, and I ground my teeth in my sleep. One evening, I decided to lock the diary in an old trunk. I carried the trunk to a corner of my bedroom behind a chair. I latched it shut, then set a few heavy books on top of it. I didn't want to see that leather cover anymore. My hands felt clammy, and I kept swallowing to clear the dryness in my throat, so I left it there overnight. I still woke up around 2 in the morning feeling uneasy, but I resisted the urge to open the trunk. The next morning, I finally unlocked it and took the diary out. My heart rate spiked as I opened it. There was more text, describing my decision to lock it away. It said I was fooling myself if I thought that would stop the entries. That line made me clench my fists. My breathing got heavier, and I felt my pulse hammering in my temples. I wanted to throw the diary across the room, but I knew that wouldn't solve anything. I felt trapped. I placed it carefully on my desk and stared at it for a long time. The sunlight from my window made the leather look older, almost brittle. My mind raced as I thought about what to do. I considered taking it back to the bookstore, but I had a feeling that wouldn't change anything. I pictured the owner's blank stare and realized I didn't even remember his name. Over the next few days, the diary's entries became more specific about my fears. It wrote about the anxiety I felt at night, about the tension in my muscles, and about certain memories I'd never told anyone. It kept hinting that more unsettling things would happen soon. Each night I found new entries describing events that hadn't happened yet. Some were harmless details, like a coworker offering me a ride to the bus stop, which actually happened the next day. Other times it described situations I couldn't verify. It said I'd argue with my neighbor about loud music, but my neighbor was out of town, so I didn't know if that was supposed to happen later, or if it was simply wrong. It started to feel like I was living two lives, the real one and the one in the diary. Sometimes they matched, sometimes they didn't. My appetite got worse. I woke up with headaches. My eyes felt tired. I kept checking the diary every morning and every night, no matter how hard I tried not to. It felt like a compulsion. The descriptions of my physical reactions were always spot on. Sweaty palms, shaky breaths, stiff shoulders. It was recording my life in real time, and also predicting moments that might happen in the future. My tension grew every time I found a new line that hinted at a possible event. I worried about things that might never happen. One night I sat in my living room with the diary on the coffee table. I turned on all the lights because I didn't want any dark corners. My hands trembled when I opened it. The new passage described me reading those exact lines. It said I was feeling cornered and paranoid, that I wanted to destroy the diary but couldn't bring myself to do it. It also mentioned that I needed to know what came next. I realized it was right. I did want to know. I felt beads of sweat on my forehead. My chest felt tight again, like I couldn't take a full breath. The diary had invaded my privacy in a way I never thought possible. I stared at the words, unsure of what to do. The text ended with a sentence. He wonders if it will ever stop, but part of him hopes it won't. I closed the diary and placed my hand on the cover. My skin felt cold and my heart pounded. I thought about throwing it out the window, burning it, or locking it away forever. But I just sat there, breathing hard, feeling that same pull I felt when I first saw it in the bookstore. Right now, I'm writing these words in a notebook I bought yesterday. I'm describing everything that happened with the diary, step by step, in plain detail. I don't know if it will help me understand or if it will make the diary's influence fade. The diary is still on my coffee table, closed. I'm afraid to open it again, but I also can stop myself. I feel trapped in this routine of checking and dreading day after day. My heart keeps racing every time I look at that cracked leather cover. I can see the faint spots where the leather is peeling. I can almost feel the ink drying on the pages, waiting for me. Every time I think about it, I feel a knot in my stomach. I wish I had a neat conclusion to this, but I don't. The diary is still there, and I'm still here, uncertain, and just hoping that by writing this all down, I can put some distance between us. But I know, deep down, that tonight, the words will be there again. The diary will keep writing about me, describing me, predicting things I never thought about, and it'll keep looking, even though I'm terrified of what I might find next. I was on my third cup of coffee when I noticed the central telescope reflecting a faint glow. The damn thing was powered down, but it looked like it was catching bits of light that shouldn't be there. I worked as an assistant in this remote observatory for a few months, and most nights were predictable. I'd monitor star charts, enter data into logs, and make sure all equipment stayed functional. Usually the darkness outside felt dull and the only excitement came from spotting a comet or verifying a new star reading. Tonight felt different right from the start. The air smelled stale and my pulse was faster than normal. I tried to ignore it, but the tension stuck around. I'd been alone for hours because our staff was small and our budget was tight. We took rotating shifts. When I first saw that flicker of light on the telescope, I assumed it was a glitch. Maybe some residue on the lens or leftover static from a previous observation. I got up from my desk to check it out. My legs felt stiff and cold, and the floor made a dull creaking sound under my boots. The interior lights in the dome were dim. We kept them that way to avoid interfering with our instruments. As I crossed the room, I felt a strange pressure in my ears, like I was changing altitude. The telescope housing loomed in the center, tall and silent. I touched the metal frame. It felt normal, smooth, a little chilled from the night air. I turned on a small inspection lamp and ran it along the edges of the telescope, checking for anything obvious. No cracks, no burn marks, no sign of damage. but the lens looked reflective even though it usually appeared dull with the light off. I moved my face closer. I saw a faint shimmer like a distant glow behind the glass. It reminded me of a short circuit or a flickering LED, but I knew all the systems were offline. I wondered if it might be external, maybe a passing satellite. That's not unusual in this line of work, so I leaned in trying to see if there was any movement. My breath fogged the lens for a second. When it cleared, I saw a soft white glow. It moved across the surface of the lens and vanished. My hair stood on end. I figured I should record everything, so I went back to my console. I logged the time. I wrote a short note about an unexplained reflection on the telescope lens. Then I tried to capture a quick image with a handheld camera. The screen showed nothing but darkness. That was irritating. I decided to check the external sensors in the audio feed. We keep an audio recorder running to capture ambient sounds. We often get interference from radio signals or cosmic noise, but sometimes we log random night sounds like wind gusts or distant wildlife. I put on the headphones and fast-forwarded through the last hour's recording. At first, I heard the usual static. Then I heard a small sequence of sounds that made my heart pound. It sounded like a low whisper or several whispers overlapping. It was faint, and I couldn't make out any words, but it resembled human voices more than static. I replayed that section a few times. The more I listened, the more it felt like it was calling from somewhere close. I noticed my hands were shaky. I took a deep breath and tried to stay calm. I'm not superstitious, and I'm not easily frightened, but there's a point where things stop making sense. That feeling settled into my chest. I jotted down the audio timestamp and walked back to the telescope. My gut told me to check the lens again. This time, I didn't use the inspection lamp. I just stood in the dark, letting my eyes adjust. The dome overhead was mostly open, but outside I saw clear skies. A normal star field hung above us, but the telescope lens looked like it had a dim glow pulsing in and out. If I stared too hard, I almost lost it. But if I relaxed my eyes, I could see it. It was like a weak heartbeat. I reached out and put my hand near the lens, not touching it, just feeling for warmth. Nothing. It was cold. Then I leaned in, deciding to look through it even though the telescope was disconnected. I wanted to see if anything was visible. I peered through the eyepiece. I expected a black view or maybe some faint starlight. Instead, I saw a clear image of the sky, crisper than usual. I saw constellations I recognized, but there were these translucent shapes moving between the stars. They were faint. They looked like elongated silhouettes drifting back and forth. My breathing got tight. I felt my pulse in my neck. I tried blinking, but they stayed there. They almost looked alive, gliding in slow arcs. I could see through them. They gave off a slight shimmer like a hazy reflection on water. I pulled away from the eyepiece. My back felt tense, and a bead of sweat ran down my temple. This was not typical. I tried the camera again, aiming it at the eyepiece. When I played the footage, I only got static. My mouth felt dry. I decided to see if the main computer could pick up the signal from the telescope. Of course, the system told me the telescope was off, so no data feed. That made no sense given what I just saw. I stepped away for a moment to splash some water on my face at the small sink near the back of the room. The water was ice cold and helped me focus. I looked at myself in the mirror. My eyes were bloodshot and I looked tired. I told myself I might be hallucinating from lack of sleep, but I knew I wasn't that exhausted. Something was going on. I went back to my station and started flipping through the last few days of logs. I wondered if anyone else had reported something strange. I found nothing in the official logs, but I noticed a few lines of personal notes in the margin from the senior technician. He wrote about hearing unusual static on night shifts, but never expanded on it. I replayed the audio recording again, searching for more anomalies. This time the whispering felt louder. It sounded like soft conversation in another room. I paused and rubbed my temples. My heart was beating faster and I felt a tightness in my chest. I told myself to keep it together. I scribbled down 2:30 a.m. voices on audio feed. Unknown origin. Then I made a decision that felt risky. I would keep watching through the telescope to see if I could learn anything. I wanted more than a fleeting glimpse of those shapes. I walked back, turned the telescope's manual focus dial, and put my eye to the eyepiece. At first I saw the familiar star field. Then I adjusted the focus a bit more. The shapes were there again. They were moving in slow patterns, drifting like they had some purpose. I tried to see if they had any recognizable form, arms, faces, or anything like that. They looked more like outlines of figures, but nothing distinct. As I watched, I heard a slight ringing in my ears. It built up into a kind of pressure behind my forehead. I clenched my jaw. It felt uncomfortable, like a headache forming. I forced myself to keep looking. After maybe a minute, the shapes seemed to merge into one bright spot. That spot pulsed a few times, then disappeared. I staggered back, feeling dizzy. I sat down on a nearby chair, rubbing the back of my neck. My mind spun with questions. Was I witnessing some kind of celestial phenomenon we hadn't documented before? Or was there something else happening? Something that wasn't natural? My body felt clammy, and I noticed my shirt sticking to my back. The air in the dome felt heavier, almost suffocating. I stood up and decided to open the exterior vents. Normally, we keep them shut during observations to control temperature, but I needed fresh air. I walked over to the control panel near the door. I flicked the switches for the vents and a rush of cool night air flowed in. It smelled faintly of sagebrush and desert soil. I took a few deep breaths. My heart rate slowed a bit, but I still felt a gnawing anxiety in my gut. I glanced at the telescope. It loomed in the darkness, still and silent, but I knew something was going on with it. I checked the exterior cameras next. We have a few to monitor the surrounding area for wildlife or intruders. The feeds showed empty ground, a few rocks, and faint starlight. No sign of anything unusual. I felt a small surge of relief, but it didn't last long. The audio feed still carried those faint voices, or at least that's what it sounded like. I tried to isolate the frequency, but I'm not an audio expert. The best I could do was adjust the gain and record more. The voices rose and fell, never forming clear words. It felt like listening to a conversation underwater. I realized I was hungry, but I had no appetite. My throat felt tight. I opened a protein bar and forced myself to chew. My hands were still trembling. I kept checking the time. The shift was halfway done, but it felt like it had been days. I decided to see if any of the old records in the storage room mentioned similar events. I grabbed a flashlight and headed down the short hallway into a cramped archive area. Rows of shelves held dusty files and old tapes. I rummaged for anything about abnormal observations. Most of it was routine data from decades past. I spotted a few references to unidentified signals, but they always ended up being satellites or cosmic noise. After a few minutes, I found a binder marked Unexplained Phenomena. Inside, there were only a few pages. One was a short description from an older astronomer who claimed he saw moving lights in the sky that didn't match known satellites or planes. Another page talked about radio interference that sounded like chanting. There was no conclusion or solution, just notes that the phenomena stopped after a few nights. I flipped the page and saw a scribbled drawing of a telescope with lines emanating from the lens. Next to it, someone wrote, "Not from here." That's all it said. My stomach turned. I slammed the binder shut. My flashlight flickered, so I tapped it and headed back to the main dome. My footsteps echoed in the corridor. The building felt colder than usual. When I reached the dome, I noticed the telescope lens flickering again, like a weak light source behind it. I approached slowly, feeling sweat form on my forehead. I could sense my heartbeat in my ears. I decided to speak out loud. "Hello?" My voice echoed. There was no response. I wasn't sure who or what I expected to answer. My breath felt shaky. I climbed the small step stool and pressed my eye to the eyepiece once more. This time the shapes were closer. I swear they seemed to be right up against the lens, drifting in a slow circle. My eyes watered from the strain of focusing. I heard a low hum around me, though I wasn't sure if it was the ventilation system or something else. The shapes parted, revealing a deeper view of the sky. I saw a swirling patch of darkness, darker than anything I'd seen before. My chest tightened. I felt like something was pulling me forward. My hands gripped the telescope frame. My mouth went dry. I tore my eye away and gasped for air. I stumbled off the stool and flicked on every light in the dome. The sudden brightness was harsh. My eyes stung. The lens stopped glowing. The voice-like whispers on the audio feed faded. I looked around, panting as if expecting to see someone else in the room. But I was alone. My skin crawled. I fought the urge to run outside and just keep running. Instead, I forced myself to calm down and turn the lights off again. I needed to see if the phenomenon came back. Without the darkness, I couldn't observe anything. I sank into my chair, keeping my eyes on the telescope. I set the audio to live monitoring. Every now and then I heard a slight static burst. My stomach was in knots. My muscles felt tight. I realized that whatever was happening seemed to react when I observed it. I glanced at the time again. It was almost. I had a few hours left on my shift. I considered calling my supervisor or waking the other staff, but I hesitated. I didn't want to sound like a fool. I had no proof beyond some weird audio clips and my own frightened impressions. I decided to try once more, but this time I'd record my own voice describing everything as it happened. I placed a microphone on a small stand next to me, then approached the telescope. My hands were sweating, so I wiped them on my pants. They spoke quietly. I'm looking at the telescope lens again. The time is. I see a faint glow. I leaned in. The glow was back. I described it in plain terms. Flickering light, faint pulse, no immediate heat. Then I put my eye to the eyepiece. I saw star formations. Unknown translucent shapes appeared to move, slow and seeming to change position like drifting figures. I felt that pressure building in my head again, and the hum in the dome grew louder. My voice shook. The shapes are converging in the center of the lens. They're forming a bright spot. My breath caught in my throat. The spot blinked like a small beacon. I felt a wave of dizziness. My knees wobbled. I put one hand on the telescope mount for support. I'm experiencing physical discomfort. My head hurts. My heart is pounding. I felt an urge to look deeper, like something's pulling me in. I took a step back and ended the recording. I turned off the mic. My body was covered in sweat. I felt exhausted and shaky, but I knew I had caught something, at least in audio form. I stumbled over to the console and played back the recording. My voice sounded strained. I heard a low hum behind me. It didn't sound like our usual equipment hum. It rose in pitch near the end of my recording, then vanished when I stepped away from the eyepiece. I slumped in the chair and stared at the telescope. A million questions ran through my mind. I didn't have answers. The shapes, the whispers, the pressure in my head, none of it felt normal. I felt an instinct that something wanted to make contact, or maybe it was luring me. I couldn't tell. In the end, I stayed there watching the dome until the sun's first light crept in through the open hatch. That faint glow on the lens disappeared as the sky brightened. The audio feed went back to normal static. My entire body felt tight with stress. I shut down the recorder, made a final note in the log, and decided to wait for the relief shift. I didn't plan on telling them every detail. I needed time to process it on my own. I left the observatory that morning with my mind buzzing and my skin tingling. I still felt like something was behind me, watching. Now, whenever I think about that night, I get chills. I remember the flicker in the lens and those shapes that weren't supposed to be there. I recall the whispering sounds and the way my body reacted. I keep wondering what I might have seen if I'd kept looking. There's a part of me that wants to go back and stare into that lens until I find answers. But there's another part that never wants to see that glow again. I still work at the observatory, and I still do my usual data checks, but I don't stay alone in the dome if I can help it. Something tried to reach out to me that night, and I don't know if it was friendly or not. All I know is it felt real, and it still lingers in my mind. I don't have a solid explanation. I don't have proof that would convince anyone else, but I was there, and I know what I saw. Something was in that telescope lens. Something was in the sky, moving around and whispering through our sensors. And for a moment, I felt like I was on the edge of a place that doesn't belong to our world. Sometimes I lie awake and wonder if it's still trying to get my attention. Sometimes I think about going back with more gear, more recording devices, or a colleague to confirm what I experienced. But every time I consider it, my chest tightens, and I break out in a cold sweat. So for now, I keep my head down, do my job, and hope that glow never returns. If it does, I'm not sure I'll be ready, but a part of me thinks it's only a matter of time. I first noticed that weird house 2 weeks ago. It stood out on my walk back from the grocery store. The roof had this odd pitch, almost like someone had messed up the original design and tried to fix it with random pieces of wood. The front windows were boarded up with old planks. Most people on the street seemed to avoid looking at it, but I couldn't help feeling drawn to it. I kept thinking about why anyone would leave a house like that. When I passed by at night, I sometimes saw a soft glow flickering behind the boards. There was no sign of electricity running there. No cables connected to the house. No lights shining through normal windows. Yet, I caught these faint movements of light inside, It was almost like a lantern drifting around. Every time I saw it, my stomach tightened. I'm not easily scared. I've lived in rough neighborhoods, dealt with break-ins, and had my share of tense moments. But that house put me on edge. The second night, I noticed the glow. I stopped on the sidewalk and stared. The boards looked rotted, and the nails stuck out. The paint on the house had peeled off long ago, revealing dull gray wood. The front steps were cracked. I remember hearing nothing. Not even the wind decided to blow there. Eventually, my curiosity got the best of me. I wanted to figure out what was going on, or at least confirm if the place had some old wiring that caused the weird light. One afternoon, I walked up to the front door. I tried the knob, but it was locked. I pushed gently and it felt solid, like there was a deadbolt or something keeping it shut. I looked around the porch. There was an old rocking chair covered in dust. I nudged it with my foot, and it made a scraping sound on the wooden floor. My eyes drifted to the windows. The boards were nailed from the outside, which struck me as odd. If someone wanted to protect the house from intruders, they'd probably board up the inside, right? Maybe I was overthinking. I walked around the house. The yard was full of weeds up to my ankles. I saw scraps of metal, some abandoned tools, and a broken wooden bucket. The back of the house had a small door that looked like an entrance to a cellar. It was locked too, but the lock was covered in rust, and the handle looked like it might break if I twisted hard enough. I decided not to push my luck in broad daylight. I already felt like someone might be watching. I glanced up at the second floor and noticed that one of the boarded windows was slightly ajar. There was a little gap between two slats, and I thought I saw movement. My heart started pounding. I stayed still for a moment, then stepped back around to the front and hurried away. I couldn't believe how tense I felt. That evening I couldn't sleep. My mind kept replaying the glimpse of that movement upstairs. I also remembered the locked doors and the rotted boards. I didn't like feeling spooked, so I told myself I'd go back and check it out more thoroughly the next day. Maybe it was just a raccoon or some stray cat. Maybe the boards were loose in the wind. But something about that house felt deliberate, like someone had put it in quarantine. The next morning I took a few tools with me. A flashlight, a small crowbar, and a pocket knife. I wore old jeans, a dark jacket, and heavy boots. I looked around to make sure nobody was watching me. Nobody was on the street. It was a weekday, and most people were at work. I walked straight to the back of the house. The cellar door was still locked, but I pried at the rusted handle with the crowbar. After a few tries, the metal snapped. My palms were sweaty, and my heart was beating hard, but I pushed the door open anyway. Inside it was dark and the air smelled stale. The cellar had a dirt floor. There were a few stone steps leading down. I listened for any noise, but I heard only my own breathing and the creaking of the old hinges. I turned on my flashlight. The cellar looked like it hadn't been touched for decades. There were cobwebs everywhere, and I felt them brushing my face. Empty crates sat along the walls. Some old shelves held glass jars with strange colored residue inside. I tried not to imagine what they might have contained. I moved carefully, making sure I didn't trip. My flashlight beam cut through the dust, floating in the air. The space wasn't large, but I realized it extended under the entire house. I walked around, tapping the walls with my knuckles. Then I noticed a wooden hatch in the far corner. It blended in with the floor, but the edges looked worn like it had been used many times before. My heartbeat sped up. I knelt down, set my flashlight on the ground, and pulled at the handle on the hatch. It gave some resistance but then popped open, sending a puff of dust into my face. Under the hatch, I saw a narrow ladder leading up. It looked old and unstable, but I had to see what was up there. I shone my flashlight. The rungs were made of wood, and some had cracks, but they seemed solid enough to hold my weight. I climbed carefully, my heart pounding harder with each step. It felt like my own breathing was echoing off the walls. At the top, I found another door. This one was smaller, more like a trapdoor that opened into a room. I braced my shoulder against it and pushed. It took some effort, but it finally swung open. The smell that hit me was a mix of old candles, stale air, and dust. I coughed. Then I pulled myself up and stood in what looked like an old storage room. But the moment I looked around, I realized this was more than just storage. There were antique chairs with frayed upholstery, a wooden table with carved legs, and portraits on the walls. The paint on the portraits was cracked, and the people in them had those stern, formal expressions you see in really old photos. Their eyes seemed to follow me. It was unsettling. In one corner, I saw a cluster of candles that had melted onto a ceramic plate. The wax had dripped all around, forming solid puddles on the table. There were burned matches scattered next to it. I walked further in, sweeping my flashlight around. The windows were boarded up from the outside, just like the rest of the house. However, there was no door leading out. The walls looked normal at first glance, but something was off. I noticed that one corner of the room didn't line up with the outside shape of the house. It was as if there should have been a doorway there, but it was covered or sealed. The boards on the inside looked different, like an afterthought, hammered in place to hide something. I felt a wave of discomfort. My palms were sweaty, and my mouth was dry. I told myself to stay calm. I took a few slow steps, listening for any movement. That's when I heard a soft murmur. It was faint, like someone talking under their breath. I froze. My heart pounded in my ears. I stood still, holding my flashlight tight, trying to figure out if I was imagining it. Then, I heard it again. It was coming from the wall. I pressed my ear against the wood, but I couldn't understand any words, just a low moaning sound. I felt every hair on my neck stand up. I shone my flashlight on the wall, trying to find a hole or crack. The boards were nailed together in a crude way, but there was nothing obvious. The murmuring continued, then stopped. I backed away. I glanced at the table with the melted candles again, and wondered who had lit them. The wax looked old, so it could have been years since they burned. But I didn't see any dust on the candle wax, which felt strange. Everything else here was covered in a layer of dust, except that. I felt my stomach tighten. I wasn't sure what to do. I looked around the room some more. There was an old wooden armoire pushed against one wall. Its doors were slightly open. I walked over and shone the light inside. It was empty except for a coat hanger and a piece of cloth. The cloth looked like a handkerchief. I picked it up. It had some initials stitched in it, but the thread was so faded that I couldn't make out the letters. It felt eerie to hold that piece of cloth. I dropped it back and closed the armoire. The entire room felt too quiet. I stood in the center, holding my flashlight and spinning slowly to take in every detail. The furniture looked like it was from another era. The wallpaper was peeling, revealing discolored plaster underneath. The ceiling had a single light fixture, but no bulb. I kept thinking about the lights I saw through the cracks in the boards at night. Where were they coming from? There was no lamp, no electricity, no sign of modern wiring. Then in the silence I heard a faint creak behind me. It wasn't like the house settling. It sounded like a footstep on old floorboards. My heart jumped and my throat went dry. I swung around with the flashlight, shining it in every direction. I didn't see anyone. I stayed there trying to keep my breathing steady, but it felt like the walls were closing in on me. My legs felt shaky. My mind started racing with the thought that maybe someone else was there, but I saw no one. I decided I had to test something. I turned off my flashlight to see if any light would appear in the darkness. Immediately, the room went pitch black. I stood there, waiting, listening to my pulse. My skin tingled and my palms started to sweat again. After a few seconds, I noticed a faint glow drifting along the corner of the ceiling. It was hard to focus on. It seemed like it was behind the boards. It moved slowly, almost like a person carrying a candle, but there was no flicker that I could recognize. It was just a pale, soft glow. It made me feel cold. I switched my flashlight back on, and the glow disappeared. I swallowed hard, trying to steady myself. I went over to the boarded area in the corner, the one that looked different. I ran my fingers along the wood. It was nailed shut in a hurry. I took out my pocket knife and tried to pry one of the nails loose. It barely budged. The sound of metal scraping against wood made me flinch. That's when I heard the murmuring again. Louder this time. It seemed to come from all around me. My chest felt tight. I stopped trying to pry the nail and stepped back. I thought about leaving, but I also wanted answers. Instead of ripping off the boards, I walked around the room, checking every corner for some hidden door. I found none. The floor was solid. There was no second trapdoor. Nothing else looked like an exit or a passage. The murmuring died down again, but it left me feeling uneasy, like someone was watching from behind the walls. I'd never felt so exposed. I stepped up to one of the portraits on the wall. The man in the picture had a long, narrow face. slicked back hair, and a stern expression. The frame was dusty, but I noticed a small brass plaque at the bottom with a name. The letters were too faded to read. I touched the canvas lightly. It was rough and brittle. Then I heard another creak from across the room near the table. I spun around, flashlight shining, but there was nothing. My heart pounded so loudly that it almost hurt. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was trapped here. I know that sounds like I'm jumping to conclusions, but in that moment I felt cornered by the heaviness of the place. My skin was clammy, and I kept swallowing to keep my throat from going dry. The smell of melted wax and old wood made me nauseous. I told myself to stay calm, but I was shaking. I walked to the trapdoor through which I had come and looked down the ladder into the cellar. It was still dark down there. The beam of my flashlight didn't reveal anything out of the ordinary. I considered leaving, but then I remembered the earlier nights when I saw the light flickering from the street. I wanted to see if it would happen again if I stayed long enough. So, I turned off my flashlight once more, letting my eyes adjust to the darkness. My ears strained for any sound. After a minute or two, the pale glow started up again. This time it moved near the table with the melted candles. I stared, my heart racing. I couldn't make out a shape, just a soft moving light. It felt cold in the room, and I could feel goosebumps on my arms. Then I heard the murmuring again, right behind me. I jerked around, turning my flashlight back on out of reflex. The glow vanished, and the murmuring stopped. My hand trembled on the switch. I'd had enough. I moved quickly to the trapdoor. I climbed down, nearly slipping on the last rung. My feet hit the cellar floor, and I gasped for air like I'd been holding my breath. The cellar felt oddly comforting compared to that room. I walked to the outside door and stepped into the daylight. When I stood there in the backyard, breathing in fresh air, my whole body was shaking. My shirt was damp with sweat. I realized I was gripping my crowbar so hard my hand ached. I closed the door behind me. I didn't bother trying to relock it. I just backed away, looking at the house. There was nothing outwardly scary about it in the daylight, but I felt like I'd walked into someone's private misery. It was as if that hidden room wanted to remain cut off from the world, for a reason. I still didn't understand. Those whispered voices, the old furniture, and the melted candles. It all felt like a place stuck in time, refusing to move forward. I stood there for a long moment, trying to steady my breathing. My mind was racing with the memory of those faint lights drifting in the darkness. The whole experience made me feel unsettled, almost as if I'd trespassed on something I shouldn't have. Eventually, I forced my legs to move. I walked around the side of the house through the overgrown weeds until I reached the front yard. The street was quiet, no one was around. I glanced once more at the boarded windows. I couldn't help wondering if the faint glow was there, shining behind those slats. I felt a pressure in my chest like I needed to get away from that spot as fast as possible. But I also knew I wouldn't be able to forget it. Part of me wanted to rip off every board and see what else was hidden. Another part of me was terrified of spending another moment inside that place. So, I walked home. My legs felt heavy. My mind replayed the murmuring sounds and the sight of that soft glow under the ceiling. I tried to think of it as some natural phenomenon or a trick of my imagination, but I couldn't convince myself. The memory felt too real. When I finally got back to my own house, I locked the door and leaned against it. My heartbeat was still out of control. I'm not sure what I'll do next. Every time I think about going back, a cold sweat forms on my forehead. But I can't stand not knowing the full story of that boarded-up room. I keep imagining those old portraits, the cracked frames, the melted candles in the sealed corner that didn't line up with the rest of the house. Something is in there, trapped or forgotten. The murmuring voices made my stomach clench. I don't know what they're trying to say, but they sound lonely. For now, I'm just trying to get a full night's sleep. But I still see that glow in my head when I close my eyes. It drifts, soft and pale, moving without a source. I hear those low whispers in my dreams. I jolt awake, covered in sweat. I've never experienced anything like it before. I keep telling myself it's just an old house with weird architecture, boarded windows and a hidden room. But deep down, I feel like there's something else going on. Something that doesn't want to be disturbed. And until I find out what it is, I'll never stop wondering why that room stays locked away from everyone, showing only a strange glow at night and whispering through the walls like a trapped memory. I still remember the first time I noticed that figure across the gap. I was on a narrow trail near the top of a ridge, feeling the rough texture of granite under my palms as I steadied myself. The sun was behind me, warm on my neck, and the breeze felt good against my sweaty back. When I looked across to the opposite rock face, I saw a human-shaped shadow standing there. At first I thought it was just my outline, stretched out by the afternoon sun, but then it moved in a way I didn't. Its arms lifted, and I kept mine at my sides. My stomach tightened, and I felt a jolt of adrenaline pulse through my body. My heart knocked hard against my ribs. Right away, I leaned forward to see if there was someone else behind me, but I was alone. No one else was on that cliff. I stood there confused and noticed my breathing was shallow, like I was bracing for something bad. That's how it began. I make these hikes a few times a month. I've always liked walking along steep slopes and feeling that surge of nervous energy when I look down. I usually bring a small backpack with water and maybe a snack. That day, I had a light pack with 1 water bottle and a protein bar. Nothing big, so I couldn't blame any strange shadows on some bulky equipment. Yet there it was, outlined on the rock across the gap. The shape was about my height, but its limbs looked slightly bent. It didn't mirror me. I raised my right arm, and it didn't move. I stayed still, and it lifted an arm. I felt my mouth go dry. The wind picked up a bit, making loose gravel slide under my boots. I watched that shape for a while, maybe a minute, maybe 2. Then I stepped back from the ledge and I couldn't see it anymore. I tried to explain it to myself in practical terms on my drive home. I got into my car, closed the door, turned the key, and felt the engine rumble through the seat. My mind raced with possibilities. A reflection from a weird angle, maybe a trick of the light bouncing off some shiny surface behind me, or even another hiker standing somewhere else, hidden from my view. I told myself I'd go back soon to see if it happened again. I returned the next weekend. This time the sky was gray, and storm clouds hung over the ridges. The wind smelled of damp earth. I could see patches of sunlight moving across the valley below, but overhead it looked dark. The trail wasn't busy. I passed one couple near the beginning of the path, and after that I was alone. The smell of pine needles and wet dirt clung to the air as I climbed up toward that same overlook. My calves burned from the incline. My heartbeat pulsed in my ears. When I got near the edge, my hands were already shaking, and I had to wipe some sweat off my forehead with the back of my hand. The wind had picked up a bit, pushing my jacket around. I slowly approached the spot where I'd seen the figure. The ledge was narrower than I remembered. I peered across the gap, and there it was again, the shadow on the rock face, but no direct sunlight. I blinked hard, thinking maybe I was imagining it. The shape looked the same as before, just standing there in a solid outline. Even though clouds covered the sun, the figure was distinct. My skin prickled, and I felt cold despite my body heat from the hike. I tried moving my arms in a slow circle, but the shadow didn't copy me. It bent forward at the waist like it was leaning in to stare at me. My breath caught in my throat, and I took a step back. My boots scraped against the ground, sending small stones into the void. I didn't hear them hit the bottom. I felt trapped by that presence. My mind went blank, and I couldn't figure out what to do. I wanted to see if it would vanish, but a part of me wanted to run back down the trail. My hands were tingling and my stomach felt tight. I forced myself to step forward again. My pulse hammered in my ears. The shape tilted its head like it was trying to see me better. I whispered, "Hello," but my voice sounded thin. I heard no echo. There was only the wind. The shape didn't move for a few seconds. Then it lifted a hand, palm facing me. I swallowed hard. It didn't feel friendly. I don't know how to explain it. It wasn't an obvious threat either. It was just there, doing something that shouldn't be possible. I left after that. I turned around and walked fast down the trail. My legs were shaky, and I slipped once, scraping my knee on a rock. I brushed the dirt and blood off. I glanced over my shoulder a few times, but all I saw were the high walls of the trail and the drift of clouds above. When I reached my car, I realized my shirt was soaked with sweat. My hands trembled a bit when I turned the key. On the drive home, I gripped the wheel so tight that my knuckles turned white. I kept replaying the scene in my head, trying to figure out how a shadow could appear when there was no direct light. I got home, tossed my backpack on the floor, and tried to distract myself with television. But the memory wouldn't go away. I barely slept that night. Over the next few days, I couldn't focus on anything else. I'd be sitting at my desk, tapping a pen, and my mind would drift back to that outline. turning its head, raising an arm. My appetite shrank. I'd wake up in the middle of the night with my heart racing, thinking about the shape. By the following weekend, I had decided to return again. I wanted to see if it was still there. A part of me hated the idea, but curiosity was too strong. I also wanted to prove to myself that I could handle it. I didn't want to spend my days and nights wondering if I was losing my mind. That weekend, the forecast showed clear skies. The sun was bright. My drive to the trailhead felt longer than usual, probably because I kept checking the clock. I carried a bit more gear this time, a small flashlight, even though it was broad daylight, and a better first aid kit. My chest felt tight, the entire hike up. I had a dull ache behind my eyes. Each step on the rocky path felt heavier than normal. Occasionally, I heard the sound of loose rocks clacking under my boots. When I reached the final stretch before the ledge, I stopped, breathing hard, feeling the slight burn in my lungs. My shirt clung to my back, and the sun beat down on my neck. I walked out onto the ledge. My stomach tensed up as I peeked across. The shadow was there, waiting. It was in the same spot. My legs shook when I saw it again. That shape moved in a slow, deliberate way, lifting an arm like it was waving, but I wasn't waving back. I grabbed a small rock from the ground and threw it toward the opposite cliff. The stone bounced off the wall and tumbled into the gap. The shape didn't flinch. I stepped closer to the edge, feeling the gust of wind trying to push me back. My heartbeat pounded so loudly, it echoed in my skull. I looked behind me. No one stood there, and no object was creating that shadow. Yet I saw it clearly, outlined in stark contrast against the stone. The sun was shining at a slight angle, but that still didn't explain why it was so defined or why it didn't match my movements. I tried something different. I turned around and faced away from the gap for a moment, then snapped back quickly to see if I could catch the shape off guard. When I turned back, the shape was still there, but now it had both arms lowered. It seemed to be standing in a neutral position facing me. My skin crawled, and I rubbed my forearms to get rid of the goosebumps. I considered walking away again, but I felt this pull to stay. My curiosity mixed with raw fear. I swallowed and wiped sweat from my lip. I started talking to it out loud. My voice sounded shaky. I asked, "Who are you? What are you doing here?" No response. It just tilted its head to the other side. A crow cawed somewhere above. I heard the flapping of wings, then silence. The wind rushed around me, pushing my hair across my forehead. My boots scuffed against the rocky surface as I shifted from one foot to the other. My mouth felt dry, so I sipped some water from my bottle. I kept my eyes on that figure, worried that if I blinked too long it might vanish or do something unpredictable, but it stayed put. I decided to pull out my phone and take a picture. My hand shook a little, but I managed to aim the camera across it. I looked at the screen. I could see the rock face, but not the shadow. The photo just showed bare stone. My throat tightened. I snapped a few more pictures, but each one came out the same. No figure. Yet when I raised my head and looked with my own eyes, I saw it, clear as day. I felt a wave of nausea. My mind spun. I forced myself to breathe slowly, to steady my nerves. I took a step closer to the edge, testing my balance. Then I shouted, "Stay where you are." I don't know why I said that. The shape didn't move for a moment. Then it lifted its hand again, like it was reaching out. That hand gesture made me recoil. I stumbled back a step, my foot sliding on some loose gravel. My heart hammered. I could almost feel my pulse in my throat. I was so close to the edge that it made my head spin. I crouched down, making sure I wouldn't slip. My palms flattened against the cold, rough surface of the ledge. After a few minutes, I stood up again and tried to think of what else I could do. The shape was still across the gap, silent and steady. I reached into my pack for the flashlight. I clicked it on and aimed the beam at the shape. The bright circle of light appeared on the rock, but the figure stayed dark. It didn't affect it. My jaw clenched. Sweat ran down my face. My breathing got heavier as I realized I was out of ideas. Then I felt the strong urge to get out of there. I took a few steps back, watching the shape, then turned around and walked back along the trail. My mind raced with the memory of that silhouette. My body felt jittery, like I drunk too much coffee. Every once in a while I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting it to be right behind me. I didn't see anything. The walk down felt like it took forever, and the tension sat in my shoulders like a knot I couldn't unclench. I've gone back several more times. It's always there. Sometimes the sky is bright, sometimes it's cloudy, and sometimes there's even a slight drizzle. No matter the weather, the shadow shows up as soon as I get close to that ledge. It stands there watching me, moving in ways that make no sense for a shadow. I've tried filming it, but the video just shows an empty cliff. I've tried bringing along different tools, like a small mirror to see if I can bounce light back, and even wearing different clothes, carrying different kinds of backpacks, or going without one. None of that changes anything. The shadow is there, independent of my movements. It doesn't talk, it doesn't make any sound, and it never leaves. It just moves on its own, sometimes copying a movement I do a few seconds later, sometimes doing something completely different, like raising both arms above its head or twisting sideways. It reminds me of a person, but I don't know who. I've started to feel uneasy all the time, even when I'm at home. I'll catch myself checking corners, scanning walls, looking for any flicker of that shape. My posture is tense. My jaw aches from clenching. Sleep is hard to come by these days. I don't have a grand explanation. I can't say what it is or why it's attached to me. All I know is that whenever I stand on that ledge, that outline is waiting. I've seen it shift its position slightly, like it's reacting to my presence. I've heard my own pulse pounding in my ears as I stare at it. My palms sweat and my throat goes dry. Sometimes I want to turn and run before it does something worse. Other times, I feel a surge of anger because I can't figure out how to beat it. But it doesn't matter how I feel. It's still there every single time. It's like a silent challenge. I keep coming back because I can't help it. The feeling in my gut tells me I should stay away. But I can't let it go. Each time I approach that cliff, my hands start to tremble and my vision seems sharper, like my body is in full alert mode. My heart feels too big for my chest. I can taste copper in my mouth, probably from biting my tongue or the inside of my cheek without noticing. The wind whips around me, and the air tastes thin and cold at that elevation. I walk to the same spot, I look across, and the shape is there, shifting slightly, waiting for me. I don't know what else to do. It's not hurting me. It just refuses to vanish. I can capture it on camera or explain it to anyone. Nobody I've told believes me. Some think I'm overworked or stressed out. Others just shrug and say I must have seen a trick of the light. But I know what I've seen. I feel that twist of dread in my stomach every time I get close to the edge. My muscles tense up and sweat gathers at my temples. You're not imagining it. It's real to me, and I can prove it to anyone else. That's where things stand right now. I keep hiking the same trail, and I keep finding that shadow there doing its own thing. I stand and watch, feeling my heartbeat hammering and my breath turning shallow. It looks back, it lifts its arms or tilts its head, ignoring the laws of normal shadows. The experience leaves me drained and tense for days afterward, but I can't stop. Part of me wants to crack the mystery, and part of me just wants to see if it will ever vanish. So far it's always there, and it doesn't matter if the sun is out or hidden behind clouds. That shape is stuck to me in a way I can't explain, and I don't think it's going away anytime soon. I hear the bed frame creaking in that empty room again. It's past midnight, and I'm standing in the hallway outside room. There's no one in there. At least, that's what the booking log shows. I check that log every day. I know which rooms have guests and which don't. This one is on the list of vacant rooms. Nobody's supposed to be inside. Yet something is moving, and it's driving me crazy. I've been working here as the caretaker for over a year. This place isn't fancy. It has small rooms, thin walls, and old furniture. The hallway light flickers sometimes, especially near room 206, and I have to jiggle the switch to make it stop. I'm used to small annoyances like that. Leaky faucets, squeaky doors, scuffed floors. None of it bothers me. But hearing noises in a room that's supposed to be empty sets off a knot in my gut. It makes my hair stand up at the back of my neck. I don't usually get spooked, but this is different. Last month I started hearing a bed creak late at night. At first I assumed a guest had sneaked in, or maybe I forgot to lock the door. So I took out my keys, walked to the door, and twisted the knob. It was locked. I knocked and called out. Management, anybody inside? No one answered. I slid the key in, turned it, and stepped into the room. I noticed right away that the overhead light was off. The only light came from the hallway. I flicked the switch on the wall.
Nothing happened.
I tried it a few more times. The bulb was either dead or the wiring was shot. I saw no one in the bed. No bags, no shoes, no sign of an intruder. Still, the mattress looked rumpled, like someone had just been lying there. The sheets and blanket were smooth, except for the faint impression of a body shape. It looked recent, as if I had interrupted them. I walked around the bed. I pressed my hand onto the mattress. It felt warm in one spot, cool in others. I thought maybe I was imagining things, so I stayed there a good minute, waiting to see if I'd catch someone hiding. I didn't see or hear anything else. I left and closed the door, making sure to lock it. It bothered me, but I tried to forget it and went back to my rounds. The next night I heard water running in the bathroom of that same room. The pipes in this building are old, and I can usually tell which bathroom is in use by the sound of the water. The faucet in 2006 has a hiss to it. At midnight I heard that hiss. My heart started pounding. I went straight to the door with my flashlight in one hand. I put my ear against the wood. Water was definitely running in the sink. I called out. No answer. I unlocked the door, stepped inside, and found darkness. The only light came from the hallway again. I walked to the bathroom. The faucet was on full blast, water splashing in the sink. Steam rose to the mirror. I felt the temperature in the air. It was warm and damp. I turned off the faucet and looked around. No footprints on the tile floor. No wet footprints leading out. Everything else looked untouched. I checked the bed. This time it was perfectly neat. There wasn't the slightest crease in the sheets. It was like the bed had just been made. I felt my stomach tighten, and I left in a hurry. I locked the door once more. Then I checked the windows from the outside. They were closed. I couldn't see any sign of forced entry. I started thinking someone had a spare key, but that seemed unlikely. I handle the keys personally, and I don't give them out without logging them in my system. It could be an old guest key that someone forgot to return, but I didn't see any footprints or hear anyone moving around. I couldn't explain it. Over the next few weeks, more things happened. I'd walk down the corridor and notice the light under the door flickering. I'd stop and watch for a moment, see a glow, then nothing. It would go back to dark. I'd unlock the door, step inside, and find no lamps turned on. The overhead bulb stayed dead, no matter how many times I flipped the switch. But I swear, sometimes I saw light through the crack at the bottom of the door. At first I avoided telling anyone, because it sounded stupid. Nobody wants to hear the caretaker complaining about ghosts or intruders that vanish. This place has cheap rent and people come and go all the time. The owner doesn't want to lose business, so I kept it to myself. I just tried to do my job, checking the holes, taking out trash, restocking the bathrooms in the morning, and waiting for the next weird thing at night. The strangest part is the bed. Sometimes it's messed up, sometimes it's neat, but almost always it looks like it's been used. I've even smelled a faint odor that reminds me of soap or cologne. Once I touched the pillow and it felt like someone's head had just been on it. Warm, slightly damp from sweat. It made me jerk my hand away. My arms broke out in goosebumps. I kept thinking that any second I'd see an actual person, but I never did. One night, I decided to stay there for an hour just to see what would happen. I locked myself inside with the lights off. I sat in the chair by the little desk. It's a wobbly wooden chair with scratches all over it. The air was stale, and I could smell old wallpaper glue and dusty curtains.
My ears caught every tiny sound. The building settling, a distant drip in the pipes, and the hum of the old fridge down the hall.
But I didn't hear anything in that room for a while. Then I heard a single creak, like a body shifting in the bed. I got up instantly and aimed my flashlight at the mattress. Nothing was there. The sheets didn't move, and the air felt normal, maybe a bit cool. I stood there waiting, my heart pounding, my palms sweaty. I tried to keep calm, but I kept imagining something brushing past my shoulder or pulling at my shirt. I started feeling a slight pressure by my shoulder, like someone was behind me. I turned around fast, shining the light in every corner. There was nothing, but my arm hair stood on end. I felt like someone was standing in my personal space. My body was tense. The feeling lasted maybe 5 seconds, then it vanished. I sat back down, breathing hard. The rest of that hour crawled by. I kept glancing at the bathroom door, expecting to see it swing open or hear the faucet, but it stayed quiet. The moment I left the room and locked it, though, I heard the bed creak again from the other side of the door. I stood in the hallway, hand on the doorknob, too nervous to go back in. So I just walked away. I tried to behave normally in front of other guests. I greeted them, asked about their day, helped them with small issues. But at night, my mind always drifted back to room. I had dreams about walking in and seeing a silhouette on the bed. But whenever I turned on the light, it was gone. My sleep started suffering. I felt jumpy during my evening rounds, sometimes startled by my own reflection in a window or by the rattling of the old radiator. I'd get sweaty palms just thinking about that faucet turning on by itself or the bed shifting with nobody visible. A couple of times I heard small knocks on the inside of the door when I passed by. 3 soft taps, nothing loud, then silence. I stood there listening, my heart thumping. I knocked back, no answer. I unlocked the door, feeling my knees stiffen. I stepped inside, found everything quiet. I went straight to the bathroom. The faucet was off, shower curtain open. Nothing. I turned to the bed. The comforter was half pulled back, like someone had just gotten up. The pillows looked fresh and fluffed. The sheets smelled like laundry detergent and something else, like aftershave. I ran my hand across the fabric. It felt cold, yet the wrinkles suggested recent movement. I couldn't figure it out. Some nights I tried skipping that hallway altogether, but I have a job to do. I couldn't ignore my responsibilities. The next time I heard the faucet, I decided to record a video on my phone. Maybe that would help me prove something to the owner. I walked in quietly, phone in hand, flashlight ready. Sure enough, the faucet was on, water splashing. I felt the warm air around me. I started recording. The phone screen showed the empty sink and faucet, water running. Then I stepped back to capture the bed in the same frame. I spoke out loud. Room 206. Nobody booked. Nobody here. My voice sounded shaky on playback. I turned off the faucet, panned around the room, opened the closet. No one was inside. I opened the bathroom door wide to show the space. Then I shut off the video. I left, locked up, and ran to my own small office near the lobby. I pressed play to review the clip. Everything looked normal for about 30 seconds. At around the 10-second mark, though, the video flickered. The screen pixelated. Then it resumed. I couldn't see anything unusual except for that glitch. But the weird part is that I didn't see the bed in the shot after the glitch. It was like the camera angle changed without my hand moving. The bed was cut off. Instead, it just showed the bathroom sink. And the volume dropped. All you could hear was a low hum. I didn't remember hearing a hum. I replayed it 3 times. Same issue. The bed was never fully in frame, even though I'm sure I aimed the camera right at it. I didn't show it to the owner. It wasn't definitive proof of anything except that I probably messed up the recording, or maybe there's just bad reception in that room. But I know my hand was steady. That's not the kind of thing that helps me sleep better at night. After that, I started feeling more uneasy whenever I walked by. It was like the room had its own atmosphere, heavier than the rest of the floor. I began noticing that even in the daytime when I cleaned the hall, the door to 206 felt cold. I'd rest my palm on the wood. It didn't feel like normal room temperature. It felt more like metal cooled by air conditioning. But I knew we didn't have AC on in there. Sometimes I heard a faint clicking noise like someone tapping a nail on a table. It always stopped when I got close. Last week I was on my rounds around 10 at night. I walked past the door and saw light shining under it. This time it wasn't flickering. It looked like a steady glow. I knocked hard. Caretaker, who's in there? No response. I unlocked the door and swung it open, expecting to catch someone messing around. The room was dark as usual. I felt around on the wall for the switch. Still dead. The lamp on the nightstand was off. The curtains were drawn. No sign of any light source. I walked over to the bed, leaned in, and put my hand on the blanket. It was still warm. I didn't bother checking the bathroom. I felt like something was watching me, and I wanted out. I locked up and left faster than usual. By now, I can't ignore the sense that there's a presence in that room. It's like a tenant who doesn't pay rent and won't leave. I feel it behind me sometimes, especially when I'm standing next to the bed. My shoulders get tense, and I feel the hairs on my arms rise. My heart races, and I can't calm down until I step back into the hallway. Even then, I keep thinking it's following me. He'll glance behind me, see nothing, yet still feel pressure on my back. It's unbearable some nights. I've started sleeping with my office door locked. I used to keep it open in case guests needed something, but I can't do that anymore. I jump every time I hear a door shut somewhere in the building or footsteps on the stairs. I keep thinking they're coming from room 2. I don't know how to explain this to the owner without sounding ridiculous. We have an invisible guest who uses the bathroom and flips the lights on but never shows his face. That sounds insane, and I'm not interested in losing my job. Yesterday I tried something else. I changed the sheets in that room. I walked in during the afternoon with fresh linens, hoping the daylight would make me feel safer. I took the old sheets off. They looked clean, but they had that faint soap smell again. I stuffed them in a laundry bag and threw them in the hamper. Then I put new sheets on, along with a new blanket and fresh pillows. I made sure everything was neat. The bed looked crisp and unused. I stepped back to admire my work. I left the blinds open so the sun could shine in. I turned to the bathroom, checked the faucet for drips, and saw nothing. Good. I felt a sense of relief. I closed the door and locked it behind me. That night around midnight again, I heard the bed creak. I felt my hands shake a bit as I got closer to the door. I took a deep breath, unlocked it, and went inside. The blinds were still open, letting in a bit of streetlight from outside. I walked over to the bed. It was messed up. Wrinkles everywhere, as if someone had rolled around in it. The pillow was on the floor, and the blanket looked half pulled off the mattress. My chest tightened and my breathing got shallow. I leaned down, picked up the pillow. There was a fresh imprint on it, like a head had been resting there. It felt warm to the touch. I dropped it without thinking. Then I reached out and touched the sheets. They had that same faint soap smell. I felt my pulse hammering. I stood there not sure if I should run or check the bathroom. Then the sink faucet kicked on by itself, water hissing loudly. I jumped back, almost tripped on my own feet. I scrambled to the bathroom door and flipped the light switch. Of course it didn't work. I shone my flashlight on the sink. The water ran full blast. My hand shook as I reached out to turn it off. I felt the water. It was warm. I twisted the handle and the stream stopped. I backed away slowly. I kept shining my flashlight around. The air felt thick and humid. My throat felt scratchy. My heart was racing so fast I could barely hear anything else. See you. Then I felt a slight brush on my shoulder, like a light tap. I spun around, pointing the flashlight. No one was there. I wanted to shout but held it in. I just felt sweat trickling down the side of my face. My shirt clung to my back. I forced myself to leave the bathroom, step back into the main room, and walk to the door. My legs felt stiff. My knees wobbled. I locked up behind me and nearly ran down the hallway. I didn't stop until I reached my office. I shut the door, slid down to the floor, and tried to catch my breath. My hands tingled from adrenaline. I still had no explanation. Tonight, I'll be doing my rounds again. The building is quiet right now. I can hear distant traffic, a few guests talking in the lobby, but nothing from upstairs at the moment. I'm on edge though. It's only 9 in the evening, and I know that sometime around midnight I'll hear that bed frame creak or that faucet turn on. You'll feel that presence again standing next to me, breathing on my neck, refusing to leave. It's like we have a permanent occupant in room, and I can do a damn thing about it except keep my eyes open, turn off the water, straighten the bed, and lock the door all over again. I always hated staying late at the museum, but I couldn't ignore those mirrors anymore. I'd walk past them during the day, busy with my restoration tasks, and catch a quick glimpse of my reflection. Everything seemed normal there, but every time I locked up at night, I felt an unsettling pull. I knew there was something strange about those corridors, something hidden in the glass. It wasn't just my imagination. There were moments even during daylight when I thought I saw movement behind the reflection. It was always quick, barely noticeable, but once I was alone in the dark, I couldn't shake off the feeling that someone else watched me from inside those mirrors. I work here as a restorer. My job is usually calm. I scrape away old paint, fix chipped frames, brush dust off antiques. Most days I have the place to myself. Tourists come and go, and I barely notice them. But the corridor of mirrors has always stood out. These mirrors line the walls in a long hallway that connects 2 wings of the museum. They're from different centuries. Some are tall, with gold frames covered in peeling designs. Others are small, with cracks running across their surfaces. I never spend much time looking at them directly. I usually hurried past, my arms full of brushes or cleaning cloths. But last week I heard a story from one of the security guards. He said these mirrors recorded events from the past. He swore people have seen faint images of older times in them. He laughed while he told me, but I saw something in his eyes. He believed it. So I decided to see for myself. The place closes at 6. Security does its rounds, but they only check certain areas. My workshop is near the staff entrance and nobody pays attention to me if I stay late. I told the guard at the front that I'd be fixing a small tear in a tapestry. He shrugged and let me stay. By 8, the museum was quiet. The lights in most corridors were off. I grabbed a small flashlight, locked my workshop, and headed to the mirror hallway. My heart beat harder with each step. I felt a chill along my arms. The floors creaked in the silence. I flicked on the flashlight and aimed it at the first mirror on my left. The mirror was about 5 feet tall, with a wooden frame that had once been painted white. Now the paint was chipped, and the edges were stained. I saw my reflection in the center, a man in his late 30s, hair a bit messy, wearing a faded sweater and worn jeans. I moved the flashlight across my face. My reflection followed, but I saw nothing strange. I took a step back and checked the corners of the mirror. Nothing. I moved on to the next one. It was an ornate piece from the 18th century, with swirling patterns carved into the dark mahogany frame. I lifted my flashlight, shining it slowly. My reflection was there too, just me, with the same uncertain expression. I felt more curious than afraid at that point. Then I heard a soft sound behind me. It was like a gentle scrape on the floor. I whipped around but saw nothing. The corridor was too dim. I stood there listening. My ears caught every subtle sound. The hum of the air vents, a slight buzzing from the overhead lights in the distance. No footsteps. I turned back to the mirror. This time something looked off in the reflection. I saw a faint shape move behind me in the glass. It looked like a blur. I spun around again. The corridor was empty. I stared at the walls, the floor, even the ceiling. No movement. But when I turned back, I noticed the shape was gone. My pulse quickened. My stomach felt tight. I walked a few steps farther down the hallway, moving past a series of smaller mirrors. Each one had a different style of frame. Some were rectangular, some oval, some cracked. I shone my flashlight on each as I moved. In one, I noticed a shadow in the corner, like someone standing outside the reflection's edge. I quickly jerked the flashlight in that direction, but there was no one. When I aimed it back at the mirror, the shadow was gone. My throat felt dry. I tried to swallow, but my body felt tense. I reached the biggest mirror at the end of the hall. It stood almost 7 feet tall and was wide enough to reflect most of the corridor behind me. Its frame was covered in dark metal leaves, tarnished and dull. I walked up to it, shining my flashlight on the surface. My reflection stared back, but I noticed something else. A flicker moved across the glass, not matching my movements. It drifted from left to right, like a slow, sliding shape. I stepped closer. I reached out and touched the mirror with my fingertips. The glass was cold. I pressed my palm against it. A sudden tremor ran up my arm, like static or a mild electric shock. I jerked my hand back. My reflection's hand stayed a second longer in place before snapping back to match mine. That delay felt impossible. I felt my chest tighten. I stepped back to catch my breath. I looked down the corridor. Everything was still. I told myself it was just my eyes playing tricks. Maybe some reflection from my flashlight. I took a deep breath and decided to keep going. I wanted to see if the rest of the mirrors did something similar. I'd check each one, and maybe I'd find a logical explanation. As I headed back the way I came, I kept my flashlight aimed at the mirrors on my right side. The first two looked normal. I walked slowly, my shoes making a light squeak on the tile. When I reached the third one, I paused. It was a tall mirror with a simple black frame. I saw myself, but then I noticed movement behind my reflection. There were shapes flitting across the surface like silhouettes. They seemed to glide behind the glass, crossing left to right. It was like watching a shadow show. I could feel my palms getting sweaty. My flashlight trembled in my hand. I stared, trying to pick out details. The shadows looked vaguely human, but I couldn't see faces. They didn't match anything behind me in the real corridor. I turned around. The corridor was empty. I tried to call out just a week ago. My voice echoed back. Nobody answered. I turned to the mirror again. The shadows were gone. I felt a surge of panic, but I told myself I needed to keep looking. There was one more mirror at the end that I rarely noticed. It was narrow and cracked in 2 places. It hung a bit lower than the others. The plaque next to it said it was from the 16th century. I moved toward it. My hands shook as I held the flashlight. The beam of light wavered over the old frame. I stepped in front of it and saw my reflection. At first it seemed normal. I moved the flashlight, and my reflection did the same. Then I realized something was off about my face. It looked exactly like me, but the expression was different. My reflection's eyes were wide, almost terrified. Its lips were parted as if it were yelling. I couldn't hear anything. My own face, though, felt neutral. I wasn't yelling or even opening my mouth. I stared in shock. My reflection was doing something completely different from me. I watched as the figure in the mirror lifted its hands to its head, like it was clutching its hair. I felt a jolt in my gut. I couldn't control what it did. My actual hands stayed at my sides. Then, my reflection's mouth moved, forming words I couldn't make out. I couldn't hear a single sound. I could only see the shape of the mouth contorting in silence. I leaned in, trying to read its lips. It seemed to be saying something like help or maybe get out. I couldn't be certain. My heart pounded so hard I heard it in my ears. My chest felt constricted. My breath came in short bursts. Sweat rolled down my temple. I kept looking into the mirror, hoping it would stop. But my reflection continued to move on its own, reaching forward and pressing its hands against the inside of the glass. I stumbled back a step. I was tempted to run, but some strange curiosity made me stay. I edged closer again. My reflection's face was inches from mine. I tried to touch the glass like I did before. This time I felt a strong shock, like a static discharge times 10, which made my arm jerk backward. My flashlight slipped from my hand and clattered on the floor, rolling off to the side and leaving the corridor dimmer. I quickly bent down to get it. The reflection was still looking at me with that panicked expression. Now, it was pounding on the inside of the mirror silently. I felt each thud in my head, even though I heard nothing. I looked around, desperate for any explanation. The corridor felt heavier, as if the air itself was denser. My legs trembled. I forced myself to walk backward, trying not to lose sight of that mirror. The reflection's eyes locked on mine. Its hands were pressed against the glass. I heard a faint scraping sound, though I couldn't tell if it was coming from the mirror or somewhere else. My gut told me it came from that piece of glass. I couldn't believe it. The reflection was trapped, or at least that's how it looked. It was me, but it wasn't me. Its face was twisted with fear. It kept mouthing words, but I couldn't read them anymore. My vision blurred with tears. I wasn't aware of shedding. I backed into another mirror behind me. The cold frame touched my shoulder. I spun around. Immediately I saw more shadows in that mirror. They flickered again, crossing behind my reflection, which now just looked like me, startled. I turned back to the narrow mirror. My other self was gone. All I saw was my normal reflection, wide-eyed and shaking, pointing the flashlight at my own face. I let out a trembling breath. My knees felt weak. I leaned against the wall, trying to steady myself. I decided I needed to leave. I didn't want to see anymore. My head spun with too many questions, and none of them had answers. I gripped the flashlight, turned it to the ground, and started walking. I passed the bigger mirrors without looking at them directly. Out of the corner of my eye, I could sense movement, but I refused to check. My heart raced and I could barely breathe. My entire body was tense, like I was waiting for something to jump out at me. The corridor seemed longer than before. Each step echoed in the darkness. Near the entrance, I saw the tall mirror with metal leaves again. I tried to go around it, but it covered almost the entire width of the hallway. I had to pass close enough to see my reflection. At first I walked by fast, but I caught a quick glimpse of my face in the glass. I was pale and sweating. Then, in the reflection behind me, I saw the faint outlines of shadowy figures. They seemed to linger at the far end of the corridor as if watching me leave. I didn't stop. I broke into a jog, reaching the door that led back to the main gallery. I practically burst through the door, stumbling into the faint light of the next room. My heart was pounding, and I felt dizzy. I had to lean against a column to catch my breath. The rest of the museum was empty and silent. The overhead lights were off, except for the exit signs and a few emergency bulbs. I made my way to the staff exit as quickly as I could. I opened the door, expecting the usual beep of the security alarm if I had set it off. But it was quiet. The guard must have turned off part of the system for me, trusting that I'd leave eventually. Outside, the night air felt cold against my sweaty skin. I took several deep breaths, relieved to be out of that place. I looked back at the museum's large front facade.
Everything seemed normal from out here.
Just a grand old building with lights illuminating its steps. Nothing about it hinted at the strange things in that corridor of mirrors. My mind spun with everything I saw. The reflection that moved on its own. The shadows. The silent figure that looked just like me. I tried to think of a way to rationalize it. Maybe the glass was warped or had some old trick mechanism. Maybe it was a projection. But none of that explained the feeling of static on my hand, or the completely different expression on my face. I walked to my car and got in. My hand still trembled as I gripped the steering wheel. I hesitated before starting the engine. Part of me wondered if I should go back in and check. But my body screamed for me to leave. I felt nauseous. I felt thirsty. My throat was so dry I could barely swallow. I turned a key and drove away, headlights cutting through the dark streets. My eyes kept darting to the rearview mirror, half expecting to see that panicked face again. But it was just me, looking tired and scared. Once I got home, I locked my door and sat on the couch, still in my jacket. I didn't want to turn on the TV or lights. I just sat there feeling my heartbeat slowly settle. My mind replayed the corridor scene over and over. The worst part was that silent reflection. It was me, but it seemed trapped or desperate. I remembered the way it pounded on the glass, trying to speak. My stomach twisted just thinking about it. I felt sweat on my forehead again. I wanted to shake off the memory, but it stayed. Every time I blinked, I pictured that version of me on the other side of the mirror. I spent the night dozing off in short bursts. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw shadows drifting behind me in a reflection. I woke up several times, gasping for air. My chest felt tight. I got up around 4 in the morning, took a quick shower, then just sat in the kitchen drinking water. I stared at my own reflection in the window. I couldn't stop imagining something else behind me. The next day, I called in sick. I couldn't handle going back to work right away. My boss sounded annoyed, but she let me stay home. I spent the afternoon trying to distract myself, cleaning the apartment, sorting old documents, but nothing worked. My thoughts always returned to that corridor. I replayed the moment I saw my reflection doing something different. My nerves felt shot. My eyes felt hollow. I tried to calm myself by thinking about the museum in the daylight with all the visitors around. Everything would look normal, but that didn't change what I saw at night. That evening, I forced myself to sleep early, but I woke up around midnight. My apartment was dark. I got up, walked to the bathroom, and splashed cold water on my face. When I looked in the mirror, I half expected to see that other me, silently screaming. It was just me. No strange expression, no delay. I let out a shaky breath and went back to bed. Now, I'm thinking about whether to share this with my boss or the security guard who first told me the story. Part of me worries they'll laugh, or worse, that they'll believe me and want proof. I don't want to return to that corridor at night, but I also can't ignore this. If those mirrors hold some piece of history, maybe they're more than just relics. Maybe they're actual windows to things that happened long ago. But I'm not sure that's the case. It felt like something else entirely, and I can forget the face I saw in that cracked mirror. It was my face, but twisted with fear. I have no idea what it wanted from me. I can only remember its silent plea and the frantic way it pounded on the glass. I haven't been back to work since it happened. I'm supposed to return tomorrow, but I'm going to try to avoid the corridor, at least for a while. If I do have to walk through it, I'll do it during the day with people around. Still, I feel like those mirrors are waiting. They saw me. They recognized me. Maybe they stored some echo of me inside them. I think about the guard's words about how these mirrors reflect events from the past. But the thing I saw didn't look historical. It looked like a future I don't want to face, or maybe a different version of me trapped in the glass. I can't explain it. All I know is that I felt raw fear, and it's still with me. For now, I sit here in my living room, trying to steady my breathing. My hands aren't shaking as much, and my heartbeat has slowed. But every time I hear a random noise, I tense up and imagine those shadows crossing behind me. I don't know what I'll do next, but I do know I won't stay in that corridor after dark again. I don't care if the museum needs extra hands at night. I'm not setting foot there once the sun sets. I don't need to see those mirrors come alive again. Once was enough, and I can forget how it felt when my reflection didn't match my movements. That's something I'll carry with me whether I like it or not. I wasn't looking for trouble when I bought my new country house. I wanted some peace. a break from the city's noise, and a small patch of land to clear out and plant a few things. I never planned on finding anything that would change my night's sense of reality or friendships. But on my first weekend there, while pulling weeds near the old oak tree in the backyard, I spotted a tiny corner of corroded metal sticking up from the dirt. It looked like a piece of junk at first, maybe an old tin can or part of a toolbox. When I pulled it free, I saw it was a small box, closed tight. That was the moment everything shifted for me. I'm a straightforward guy, so I grabbed my tools and pried the box open. The lid creaked like it was rusted in place. Inside, there was a strange little amulet. It was about the size of a silver dollar, but thicker. It had symbols on it that I couldn't make out, and it felt weird against my fingertips, almost like the texture was soft and rough at the same time. There was no chain attached, just the amulet itself. I rubbed some of the dirt away, but I couldn't read what was etched into it. The rest of the box was empty, except for some black residue around the corners. The amulet didn't smell like metal or old coins. It had no odor I could recognize. I decided to set it aside until I finished clearing the yard. Later that day, I brought the box and the amulet into the house. I put it on the kitchen counter while I rummaged through a couple of old cabinets and drawers, looking for any cleaning supplies left by the previous owner. I felt this strange nagging in the back of my mind, like the amulet was calling me to go back and pick it up. I shook my head and finished my chores. That first night I slept on an air mattress in the living room, because I hadn't furnished the place yet. I drifted off pretty easily, worn out from all the yard work, but my sleep didn't last long. Around 2 in the morning, I woke up sweating. My throat felt dry, my heart pounded, and my hands trembled. I couldn't remember the dream right away, but as I sat there in the dark, it started coming back in flashes. I had seen a circle of hooded figures. They stood around a big fire, chanting in a language I had never heard. The chanting was slow and rhythmic, drilling into my head. Their voices rose and fell, and I saw faint shapes carved into the ground under their feet. It felt like a warning, but I had no idea what it meant. When I looked across the living room, I saw a faint glow coming from the counter. It was weak, but I noticed it. I got up, walked over, and saw that the amulet was pulsing with a soft greenish light. It flickered once or twice, then went dark. My stomach knotted up, and I felt a cold tingle run down my arms. I glanced at the windows and doors, making sure they were locked. I told myself it was just my imagination. I grabbed the amulet, stuffed it back into its box, and went back to bed. But I couldn't shake this uneasy feeling. Over the next few days, I tried to ignore the strange pulsing I had seen. I took care of basic tasks around the house, like sweeping the floors and checking the plumbing. I tried to set up my living room with the furniture I brought over in my pickup. But the first time my friend Marcus visited, he wouldn't even come inside. He stepped onto the front porch, looked around, and said he felt dizzy. I asked if he was okay. He said his skin was crawling, like someone was watching him from the trees. I told him we were alone, but he shook his head and said something felt off. He left after a few minutes and told me we could catch up later. I didn't connect it to the amulet right away, but it got me thinking. A few days later, my friend Eva stopped by. She was planning to spend the weekend helping me repaint the walls. The moment she came into the house, her face went pale. She said the air felt heavy, almost suffocating. I noticed she kept glancing at the kitchen counter where I had left the small metal box. At one point she walked over and opened it. The amulet was in there, looking dull and lifeless. She shook her head, said she felt lightheaded, and closed the box right away. She told me she had this uneasy pressure in her chest, like she needed to get out. She left that same afternoon, apologizing the whole time. She looked pretty shaken. I found myself alone with this piece of metal that gave off strange energy. I wasn't sure what to do. I searched online for any clues about unusual symbols on ancient amulets. Most of the results were nonsense or weird websites talking about curses and occult rituals. None of the images matched exactly. Some had a few lines in common, but nothing that felt solid. Meanwhile, I kept dreaming about those hooded figures around a fire. The chanting was always the same, and the sound echoed in my head even after I woke up. At one point I tried to store the amulet in the shed out back. I locked it in a small drawer under my workbench. That first night I thought I'd finally sleep without any issues. Instead, I woke up around 3 in the morning to a loud banging on my front door. I jumped out of bed, heart racing, and grabbed a flashlight. I swung the door open, but there was no one there. I shined the light around looking for anyone who might have run off, but the yard was empty and the road was quiet. No cars, no voices, nothing. My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely hold the flashlight. I decided to check the shed. My gut told me the amulet was the reason for the knock. I headed out with the flashlight, feeling the cool night air on my arms. My steps crunched on the gravel, and I noticed the wind had picked up. The shed door was still closed and the padlock looked secure. I unlocked it and went inside. Everything was the same as before, except the drawer I'd put the amulet in was open by about an inch. That drawer has a stiff slide and usually takes a good yank to move. The fact it was open at all sent a shiver through me. I opened it the rest of the way. The amulet was still there, but I swear it felt warm when I touched it. I stuffed it into my pocket and walked back to the house. I locked every door and window and spent the rest of the night awake on the couch, listening for more knocks. The next morning I tried to get in touch with the old owner of the property. I figured maybe they had left this thing there on purpose or knew something about it, but the real estate agent told me the old owner was unavailable and had already moved overseas. No forwarding address, no way to reach him. I felt cornered by this object I never asked for. I considered throwing it away, but some instinct told me that wasn't a good idea. It felt like once you find something like that, you can't just discard it. It was in my house now, part of my life. Over the next week, the dreams got worse. In one dream, I was standing in the middle of a field with that circle of hooded figures around me. They weren't chanting this time. They were staring. I heard a dull humming sound and could feel their eyes behind those hoods. My ears rang, and my chest tightened. Then, one of them reached out with a gloved hand and pressed their palm against my forehead. I jolted awake. My pajamas were soaked with sweat. My heart hammered so hard that I could hear my pulse whooshing in my ears. The clock said it was around 2 a.m. again. I got up feeling shaky and walked to the kitchen for some water. When I passed the amulet on the counter, it pulsed once with that greenish light. It made my stomach flip and I almost dropped my glass. I wanted answers, but didn't want to invite a bunch of weirdos to my place. I thought about going to a local antique dealer, but I doubted they'd have real information on something this bizarre. I kept searching online, reading bits of random text about ancient rites and forbidden objects. Most of it sounded ridiculous, like stories from some old horror movie. But little by little I noticed a pattern. People mentioned that amulets with symbols like these usually belonged to secret cults or were used in older laws for summoning. I didn't like the sound of that, but it felt close to what I was experiencing in those dreams. A few times I tried to show the amulet to my friends through video calls, but every time I held it up to the camera, they said they felt uneasy. One friend said she got goosebumps all over her arms. Another said his head started pounding the second he saw it. They told me to get rid of it, but none of them offered a solid way of disposing of something that acted like it was alive. I started thinking maybe I should bury it again, but I kept hesitating. I felt drawn to it, like I was supposed to keep it. At one point, I tried to distract myself by painting the rooms. I put on some music, rolled paint onto the walls, and tried to keep my mind off the weird energy around me. It worked for a few hours. Then I glanced over at the hole table, where the box was sitting, and I felt this sharp chill. It was like I'd walked into a meat locker. My breath even got shallow, and I swear I could see a faint haze around that corner of the room. I turned the music up louder, trying to drown out my thoughts. But a few minutes later, the power went out. I stood there in the dark, gripping the paint roller, my heart pounding. The power outage only affected my house. My neighbor's lights were still on down the road. After a couple of minutes, the lights came back. I walked over to the box and found it open again, the amulet glowing faintly. My mind raced with questions I couldn't answer, so I slammed the box shut and went outside to breathe. Weeks passed, and my sleep got worse. Sometimes the chanting in my head continued even after I woke up. I felt jumpy during the day, checking the corners of every room before I walked in. I started hearing faint whispers when I was alone, though I could never make out the words. My body felt worn down, and I drank more coffee than ever. I also noticed small changes in the house. Doors I knew I left closed were open. Objects shifted a few inches from where I'd placed them. It happened too often to be my imagination. My friend Marcus finally convinced me to go see a local historian he knew. The guy specialized in old folklore and strange artifacts found in the area. I drove into town one morning and met him at a small office above a bookstore. He was a tall, thin man with a serious expression. He asked to see the amulet, so I handed it to him. He didn't touch it right away. He just stared, then took out a magnifying glass. He said the symbols looked like they could be from an isolated group that practiced hidden rituals centuries ago. He didn't have a name for them, but he suggested they might have used objects like this to bind their influence to something or someone. I asked how to get rid of it. He said he didn't know. He told me I should keep it somewhere safe and avoid drawing attention to it. I walked out feeling frustrated and stuck. That night, I tried sleeping with the amulet in a locked chest in the far corner of the guest room. I thought maybe putting some distance between me and it would help. I woke up again around 2 a.m, hearing that same chant echoing through the walls. My skin tingled and my mouth went dry. I staggered to the guest room. The chest was still locked, but I could see light leaking out from the edges of the lid. My heart hammered as I unlocked it. The amulet glowed like a dying firefly, dim and unsteady. I picked it up. It felt warmer than before, almost hot to the touch. I stood there holding it, trying to figure out why it chose me. I had no good explanation. I only knew that I couldn't ignore it anymore. The sense of being watched increased after that. I checked the windows every night before bed, made sure the doors were secure, but I always felt like something was out there waiting. I noticed footprints in the dirt near my fence one morning, 2 sets, but they ended abruptly in the grass. I couldn't explain that. The chanting kept returning in my sleep. My body felt heavier with each day, like I was dragging around a weight on my shoulders. When my friend Ava tried to stay over again, she couldn't handle it. She felt sick within an hour of entering the house. Her muscles ached and her stomach turned. Marcus refused to step inside. He would only stand outside yelling for me to come out, acting like I had some disease he could catch. I stopped inviting people over. It wasn't worth seeing them suffer. I felt alone, but I also felt like something was pulling me in deeper, like the amulet had claimed me. Now every night, I keep the amulet on a small table by my bed. I don't like having it so close, but I can't shake the idea that if I don't keep it near, something else might take it. I sense that it's valuable to some dark force lurking in the background. I hear strange noises outside around midnight, rustling leaves, quiet tapping on the walls, and once a soft scraping sound near my bedroom window. I try to ignore it, but my nerves are shot. My palms sweat, my throat tightens, and my heart pounds like a drum whenever I think about it. I've tried to reason through it. It's just an ancient piece of metal with weird symbols. But the dreams, the reactions from friends, the glowing light, and the unsettling experiences won't stop. I know there's something else going on. I can pretend it's normal. I've started to think maybe I was meant to find it. Maybe it's not an accident that it was buried right where I decided to clear the ground. There's a tension in the air around here like a thunderstorm that never hits. Sometimes I even check my reflection in the mirror to see if I look the same. I do, but I feel different inside. Less at ease, always bracing for the next strange event. I don't know how this is going to end. Every time I consider burying it back or throwing it in the river, my heart races and my head hurts. It's like the amulet has a hold on me. I've noticed that when I hold it at night, the chanting in my dreams doesn't feel as distant. It feels close right behind my bedroom walls. I don't see a way out of this that makes sense. I just know I can't let go of it. And that thought scares me. I'm certain there's a presence out there somewhere that wants this object back. I can feel the pressure of that desire. It hangs in the air every night, making it hard to breathe. Sometimes I stare at the ceiling for hours, waiting for morning, waiting for something to happen. This is my life now. I wake up each day, check the amulet, and move through my routine. I try to keep calm, but my chest feels tight and my pulse is always up. It's like I'm waiting for a knock on the door that I know will come eventually. And when it does, I don't think there'll be a polite conversation. I think it'll be something beyond my control. Until then, I keep the amulet close because it seems like I have no choice. I found it, or maybe it found me. Either way, I can't escape it. And that's the truth. I still remember the first night it happened. I was sitting on my couch, half asleep, staring at that old phone on the shelf. I'd found it years ago in a junk shop. I never hooked it up, because it didn't work. It was just there for show. A dusty reminder of a different era. But out of nowhere, it started ringing. The sound was muffled and thin, like someone was calling from the bottom of a well. My heart pounded. I walked over and picked up the receiver, fully aware that there was no line attached. I heard a raspy voice repeat strange words I couldn't make sense of. Then it cut off with a crackle. That was the start. I'll lay it all out. It's been happening for weeks now. I'm a straightforward guy. I work a standard job, come home, and try to unwind. I don't chase ghost stories. I don't collect horror movies. And I don't have any interest in messing around with the supernatural. Yet every night around 2 or 3 in the morning, that phone rings. Sometimes it's a single ring that drags on like a broken siren. Other times it rings incessantly, one after the other, until I pick it up. It doesn't matter if I turn off every light in the house or remove the phone's power cord from the outlet. It keeps ringing. I feel the vibrations in my chest when the sound blasts through the silence. I started getting tense around midnight. I'd lie in bed waiting for the inevitable noise, and my palms would sweat, my stomach would clench, and I'd stare at my bedroom door, imagining the phone just outside in the living room, waiting to jolt me awake. My mind would race with explanations. Maybe there's some hidden battery inside, or some electrical fault in the wiring of the house. But that didn't make sense, because I'd checked. I'd held the phone in my hands, turned it over, pulled the cable out, and confirmed it had no connection to anything. The power cord didn't even matter. I left it unplugged after the first few nights, hoping that would fix it. No change. The second night, I decided I wouldn't pick up. I wanted to see if the ringing would stop. It just kept going. My ears started hurting, and my eyes watered from the constant noise. I jumped up, marched into the living room, and grabbed the receiver. The moment I said hello, T, the line crackled like static on an old radio. That same raspy voice spoke. It kept repeating the same words: Marford, Helmsway, Rowan Hill, find them. I had no idea what it meant. I'd ask, who is this? Why are you calling? But the voice only repeated those names or places, or whatever they were. Then I heard a faint breathing sound and it ended with a click. Immediately the phone went dead. After that, I couldn't fall asleep. My head was buzzing. The next morning I tried to reason it out. I looked at the phone's underside, searching for any brand name or weird gadget. It was just a standard rotary phone from the 1970s, or maybe early 1980s, with a metal dial and a worn-out handle. I checked the bottom for compartments. Nothing. I unscrewed the case to see if there was some hidden speaker or battery. I didn't find anything that looked out of place. I hooked it back together and set it on the shelf. I spent the day with a knot in my gut. I felt exhausted. By evening, I considered taking the phone outside and throwing it in the trash. But I guess I'm more stubborn than smart. I wanted proof. I needed to convince myself I wasn't going crazy. So I set up my phone's camera in the living room, aimed it at that old device and hit record. I turned off the TV, turned off the lamp, and went to bed. Around 2:30 in the morning, I heard the familiar ring. My heart rate soared. I scrambled to the living room, phone in hand, and saw the old rotary phone rattling on the shelf. It physically shook with each ring. I picked it up. The voice returned. It repeated those same strange words. Marford, Helmsway, Rowan Hill, find them. Then it stopped. I checked my phone's camera right after. The video caught the entire sequence. The phone's bell was ringing loudly and clearly. The rest of the room was dead silent. When I played that video back the next morning, the sound of the ring sent chills through my body. It was real. I had proof. But I also felt unsettled because it confirmed that this wasn't a hallucination. Something was truly happening, and I didn't know how to handle it. I tried telling a coworker about it. We were on a lunch break, sitting in a corner booth at a burger joint. I showed him the video. He stared at the screen, listening to the ring. His eyes darted around as if he was waiting for me to admit it was a prank. I told him I had no idea what was going on. He shrugged and said maybe the phone had some leftover wiring that was acting weird. He suggested I just smash the phone to pieces, but the way he shifted in his seat told me he was freaked out. I left that conversation feeling even more tense. That night, I resisted the urge to fling the phone out the window. Instead, I decided to let the phone ring and ring even if it would keep me up. I wanted to see if it would stop on its own. The ringing started at around 2 a.m. It went on for what felt like forever, echoing through my entire apartment. My neighbors must have heard it, but nobody ever asked me about it. After about 5 minutes of this torture, I couldn't take it. I grabbed the receiver and yelled, "What do you want?" The voice didn't respond. I just repeated its list of odd names and cut off. I slumped onto the couch. My hands were shaking, and my chest felt tight. Over the next few days, I started looking up those names on my phone whenever I had a moment. Marford, Helmsway, Rowan Hill. I didn't find anything concrete. There was a Marford Lane in some small town halfway across the country. Helmsway appeared in a news article from years back, talking about a defunct factory. Rowan Hill popped up as part of a real estate listing for farmland somewhere.
None of them were near me, and none of them connected in any obvious way.
I spent hours scrolling through search results, my eyes stinging in the glow of my laptop. Nothing made sense. A few nights later, I tried something different. I got a small digital recorder and placed it next to the phone. I sat in the dark, sipping cold coffee, waiting for that ring. Around the usual time it came. I snatched up the receiver and pressed record on the little device. I asked, "Why are you calling me?" The voice rattled off the same words, but this time it added something else. Drighton Falls. It repeated that several times as though it was an urgent clue. I scribbled it down on a notepad. My hand was shaking so much the letters looked like scribbles. After the voice stopped, I rewound the recorder. The ring and the voice were there, crystal clear. By now I was surviving on coffee and anxiety. I couldn't focus at work. I snapped at people for no reason. I spent my free time hunched over my computer typing in these new words. Drighton Falls. I found references to a small reservoir somewhere in the Midwest, but it felt random like everything else. I called a friend who was good at research and explained the situation. I played the recordings for him over the phone. He sounded puzzled and a little scared. He said he'd look into it, but I never heard back about any real leads. Everything about these random places seemed disconnected. I started leaving every light on in my place, hoping the brightness would somehow push away that creepy energy. It didn't help. The phone still rang. My hands would get clammy, and my legs would shake the moment I heard that first ring. Sometimes I'd pick up immediately, hoping the voice would say something new. Other times I'd let it ring a bit, praying it would stop on its own. It never did. One night I tried wearing earplugs. I figured if I couldn't hear it, maybe I could sleep. I lay in bed, pressing the plugs deeper into my ears. I heard a faint ring anyway. My heart fluttered and I felt sweat forming on my forehead. I got up, walked into the living room, and saw the phone shaking on the shelf. The ring was so loud I could feel it through my feet on the floor. It was like a vibration that traveled through my bones. I picked it up. The voice repeated the same cycle of words, then silence. My frustration boiled over. I yanked the phone off the shelf and threw it across the room. It bounced off the couch and landed on the floor with a dull thud. It didn't break. I glared at it, my breath coming in short bursts. My chest tightened, and I realized I was on the edge of a panic attack. I sank onto the couch and buried my face in my hands. I kept thinking, this can't be real. Phones don't ring when they're not connected. Voices don't come out of nowhere. But I had proof on tape. I had video recordings. I tried talking to a neighbor who looked polite enough, so I thought maybe he'd listen without judging me too much. I played a short clip of the ringing, and he grimaced, saying it was probably a weird prank or a machine malfunction. I could see in his eyes that he didn't believe me. He suggested I hire an electrician to check the apartment's wiring. The electrician came the next day, poked around for a while, and found nothing. He said everything looked normal. He held the phone in his hands, turned it over, and said there was no reason it should ring at all. The next step I took was more desperate. I recorded the phone ringing over a series of nights, capturing the voice each time. Then I cut together an audio file that included every reference the voice made: Marford, Helmsway, Rowan Hill, Drighton Falls, and a few other random words it threw in. I listened to that file on a loop, hoping I could spot patterns or get some clue about what it wanted. I heard the voice break at times like it was straining to speak. It gave me chills. A tightness developed in my neck, and a tingling sensation spread to the base of my spine. I turned it off after an hour because I couldn't take it anymore. Eventually, my anxiety drove me to do something drastic. I took the phone, wrapped it in a thick towel, and stuffed it in a cardboard box. Then I sealed the box with heavy-duty tape. I placed it in the corner of my closet behind a stack of old jackets. I was hoping that if it rang, at least it would be muffled. That night, I stayed up with the TV on, volume turned up, trying to drown out any potential noise. Around 2:30 I heard a faint ring. It vibrated through the walls, creeping into my ears. I paused the TV and listened. The ring got louder. I felt my stomach churn. I walked to the closet and opened the door. The cardboard box shook. The tape peeled at the edges. I yanked the box out, tore it open, and grabbed the phone. Same routine. I heard that rasp. Moffat, Helmsway, Rowan Hill, Brighton Falls. My arm trembled.
I wanted to smash it, but I couldn't make myself do it.
I realized I had to live with this until I found some kind of answer. Or maybe there was no answer. I wasn't ready to accept that, though. I started losing weight because I had no appetite. My reflection in the mirror showed dark circles under my eyes. My hands shook if I tried to hold a cup of coffee. The phone calls kept coming, night after night. Sometimes the voice would add a new place name or phrase, but it was mostly the same pattern. A couple of nights ago, I recorded one more call. The voice sounded more distant than before. I strained to make out new words. It repeated the same lines, but it ended with a single word I'd never heard. Soon. It sounded final. That scared the hell out of me. I felt the hairs on my neck stand up, and a chill run through my arms. I placed the receiver down and stared at the phone for a long time, half expecting it to ring again. It didn't. That's where I am now. Every night I wait for that ring. I can make it stop and I can't explain it. But at least I have proof that something is happening. Recordings, timestamps, and video clips. I'm not imagining this. I've considered moving, but I'm afraid it'll just start happening somewhere else. Maybe the phone's attached to me in some way. I keep it on a table now in plain view, so it can't surprise me as easily. I feel a constant tension in my muscles, like I'm ready to fight or run. My nerves are shot. My mind is stuck on these strange places the voice keeps listing. I don't know what comes next, but every night it's the same routine. I'll check the connection, see that it's not plugged into anything, and wait. At 2 in the morning, I'll hear that muffled, otherworldly ring echo through the silence. My heart will race, and it'll pick up. That voice will speak, raspy and repetitive, listing words I can't tie together. Then it'll click off. It'll put the receiver back, feeling the sweat on my palms and the dryness in my mouth. And he'll wonder why I ever brought that damn phone into my home in the first place. But it's too late now. It's there, and it's not going anywhere. I never expected to feel uneasy in my own home. The day I moved in, I thought I had found a quiet place to settle down. I didn't expect to discover something that kept me awake at night, something that made my skin crawl. At first, I tried to ignore it. I tried to convince myself it was all in my head. But the statue in the garden won't leave me alone. I remember unpacking my boxes. The house felt empty. The movers placed my couch in the living room and stacked my belongings in a corner. I walked to the sliding glass door in the living room that led to the small veranda. I pulled it open to let in some air. That's when I saw the statue for the first time. It stood in the center of the garden, facing my direction. It had a smooth, blank expression, but its eyes seemed to stare straight at me. The statue looked old, maybe a bit weathered, with cracks along its edges, but it was solid and tall, just a couple of feet shorter than a full-grown person. I felt a little chill run through me, but I told myself it was just the breeze. I started my routine that week. I went to work, came home, made dinner, watched some TV. During that first week, I would sometimes catch a glimpse of the statue through the curtains if the wind moved them. It didn't bother me much. I thought it was just some weird lawn ornament the previous owner left behind. But after a few days, I got this nagging sense that it was too close to the veranda. I would stand on the veranda, look out and think, wasn't it farther away? But I had no proof. I tried to be rational. Statues don't move. The garden wasn't huge, but I figured maybe my memory was playing tricks on me. One night after dinner, I walked outside to get some fresh air. The sky was clear, and I could see a few stars. The garden felt calm, with tall grass and a few scattered stones. The statue stood there unchanging at first glance. I stepped closer to get a better look. I noticed its eyes weren't carved in a usual way. They had shallow indentations, almost like they were slightly open. I felt a prickle on the back of my neck. I backed away and returned to my living room. I left the blinds partially open. Later that night, around 2 a.m., I woke up. I couldn't get back to sleep. I kept thinking about the statue. I decided to check the veranda. I slid open the door as quietly as I could. The outside light was off, so I could only see the yard in the faint glow coming from my living room lamp. I squinted. The statue seemed a bit closer than before. Maybe it was just my imagination. I walked out a few steps and felt the cool night air on my arms. The grass rustled softly. I stared hard at the statue. I was almost sure it was closer to the veranda than it had been, but in the darkness, I couldn't measure distance as well. My heart pounded a bit, but I tried to shrug it off. I went back inside. The next morning, I woke up tired. My phone's alarm buzzed, and my head ached from lack of sleep. I went to the veranda to get some air. The statue looked normal in daylight. I took out my phone and snapped a photo just to have a reference point. I told myself I was being silly, but I liked the idea of having something to compare if I got paranoid again. Then I left for work. That evening I returned around 7 p.m. and checked the statue immediately. I took another photo from the same angle. I compared the two side by side on my phone. The difference was tiny, almost invisible. Yet it looked like the statue's head had turned just a fraction, as if it were tilting slightly. I stared at the photos until my eyes hurt but couldn't be certain. I felt a wave of unease. I decided to take a photo every day. If the statue was actually shifting, I would see it eventually. Over the next few nights, my paranoia grew. I'd step onto the veranda and feel my muscles tighten. Sometimes I felt like I couldn't breathe easily. I'd scan the yard for footprints or marks in the dirt. The statue stood on a simple stone base, but I couldn't see any sign of tampering. I wondered if some prankster was messing with me, but the fence around my property was tall and the gate was locked. No one had the key except me. I started checking the lock twice a night just to be safe. My hand shook a bit whenever I turned the key in the lock. I was that tense. One night, around 1 a.m., I woke up and heard a scraping sound. It was faint, but it caught my attention right away because the house was usually silent at night. I listened closely, my heart thumping. I lay in bed staring at the dark ceiling. I wondered if an animal was wandering around outside. I waited, holding my breath. Then I heard it again, like stone against stone. I sat up slowly, my pulse hammering in my ears. I got out of bed and grabbed my phone. I crept toward the living room, turned on the lamp and paused near the window. The scraping stopped. Everything was quiet. My heart was pounding so hard that I could feel it in my chest. I stepped to the veranda door and pushed the curtain aside. The statue looked like it was about 5 or 6 feet from the veranda steps. That was definitely closer than before. There was no doubt in my mind. I felt my scalp prickle and my mouth go dry. I snapped a photo right away. Then I shut the curtain, locked the door, and stood there, breathing hard. The rest of the night, I paced around the living room. I kept checking the phone's photo and comparing it to the ones I had from previous days. The statue's face looked slightly different each time. The mouth was tighter. The eyes looked narrower. It was subtle, but I could see it clearly when I zoomed in. It made my stomach turn. I felt pinned down by dread. I wanted to sleep, but I didn't dare close my eyes. At one point, I stepped outside with a flashlight. The night was still, and the yard looked empty except for that statue. I walked up to it, keeping the beam of light on its face. My hands shook. I circled around it, checking for any wires or hidden mechanisms. I found nothing. I tapped it, and it felt solid. I tried to push it, but it wouldn't budge. It was heavy. I noticed the faint cracks in its torso and arms. They made it look ancient. The face was carved in a way that made it look half awake. I had an urge to smash it or break it, but I held back because I thought maybe I was losing my mind. I didn't want to cause damage to something that might just be a creepy decoration. I returned to my house, locked the door, and tried to breathe calmly. The following day, I decided to work from home. I couldn't focus in the office with this on my mind. I set up my laptop by the window so I could watch the statue while I typed. I felt my muscles staying tight all day. Every time I blinked, I jerked my eyes back to the statue, half expecting it to appear closer, but it stayed in place. I started to relax a bit. Maybe it only moved at night. That thought gave me a sick feeling in my stomach. I knew I needed some kind of plan. That afternoon, I tried to call a friend to talk about it. I wanted to ask if he'd had any experience with weird garden statues or if he thought I should get cameras installed. But as I tried to explain it, I realized how crazy it sounded. Dude, the statue is moving on its own. Just didn't seem like something anyone would believe. My friend laughed it off, saying maybe I was just stressed from the move.
I told him I'd figure it out.
I hung up, feeling alone in this. I set up a camera on my veranda that evening. I positioned it to capture the statue's location. I connected it to my laptop, ready to record overnight. Around 11 p.m. I locked all the doors. I sat in the living room, sipping water, trying to calm down. Every time I thought about checking outside, my pulse speeded up. But eventually I forced myself to open the curtain. The statue was still out there. I felt my hands clench into fists. I tried to sleep on the couch so I could be near the veranda in case something happened. I drifted in and out of light sleep until about 2 a.m. Then I heard the scraping sound again. I sat bolt upright, my heart pounding. I hurried to my laptop and clicked on the camera feed. It was dark outside, but the camera had a small night vision feature. I stared at the screen, waiting. For a moment, everything was still. Then I saw a slight jerk of movement on the screen. I froze. The statue shifted, leaning forward and dragging across the ground. I had to clamp my hand over my mouth so I wouldn't cry out. I grabbed the flashlight and rushed to the veranda door. I threw it open and aimed the light at the statue. It stood there closer than before, maybe only 3 feet from the steps. My legs felt weak. I could barely stand. My throat was tight. I shut the door, locked it, and backed away. I tried to calm down enough to watch the footage. The camera had caught the statue moving. It was slow, almost like someone pushing a heavy object inch by inch. There was no person there, no sign of strings or anything attached. The statue just moved by itself. My thoughts raced. I need proof, I thought. But who would even believe this video? They'd think it was some kind of prank or special effects. My body felt hot and my head buzzed with anxiety. I replayed the footage until my eyes blurred. The next morning I went outside with the intention to push the statue away from the veranda. I didn't want it that close to the house. I braced myself, took a deep breath, and shoved against the statue's shoulder. My sneakers dug into the dirt, but the statue barely budged. I pushed with all my strength, leaning my full weight into it, and managed to slide it a few inches back onto a flatter part of the grass. My arms ached, my shirt was soaked in sweat. When I stepped back, I noticed a trail in the dirt where it had moved. The base had scraped a shallow line in the ground. I looked at the statue's face for a few seconds, and a wave of nausea hit me. Its expression looked more focused than before, like it was annoyed. I backed away, unsure what to think. I could feel sweat trickling down my temples and my stomach cramped. That night, I tried not to check the veranda. I figured I couldn't handle the stress of seeing it move again. I locked all the doors, closed the curtains, and turned up the volume on the TV to drown out my thoughts. But I couldn't concentrate on the shows I was watching. My knees bounced and my chest felt tight. Around midnight, I heard a faint thump outside. I paused the TV and listened. It sounded like something heavy shifting on the ground. My skin tingled. I stood up and walked to the curtain. My hands shook as I grabbed the edge. I peeked out. The statue was back near the veranda, about where it had been before I pushed it. It faced the door with its slightly open eyes. A sudden wave of panic flooded me. I stepped back and stumbled against my coffee table. My shin hit the edge, and I almost fell. My heart raced. I felt a burning urge to get out of the house, but didn't want to leave it alone. I had no idea what I was dealing with. I tried to call the previous owner of the property. I still had some paperwork with his contact information. The phone rang, but nobody answered. I left a short message asking about the statue in the yard, saying I had some questions about it. I never got a call back. I even tried to look up the statue's origin online, but all I found were general articles about garden statues and decorative pieces. None of it helped. Over the next few days, my anxiety skyrocketed. I started sleeping with the lights on. I jumped at small noises in the house. Sometimes I thought I heard footsteps, but there was never anyone there. I covered the windows with thick curtains because I didn't want to see that statue anymore, but I could feel it like it was pressing in on me. Whenever I needed to step onto the veranda for some reason, I felt short of breath. I'd open the door, glance at the statue, and slam the door shut again. I took a new photo each morning just to have evidence. The expression on its face kept shifting in tiny increments. The cracks on its surface seemed deeper now, or maybe I was just noticing them more. But the eyes were always the worst part. They weren't big or detailed, yet they seemed alive when I looked at them. One evening, I lost control of my nerves and started yelling at the statue from my veranda door. I shouted that I wasn't afraid, even though my voice shook. I told it to stop messing with me. My chest was heaving and my arms trembled at my sides. I felt a little foolish yelling at a piece of stone, but I was at my breaking point. That night, I placed heavy furniture against my doors. I put a chair in front of the veranda door. I kept my laptop camera recording again, pointing outside. Around 3 a.m., I heard the scraping sound, this time very close. My entire body tensed up. I checked the camera feed and saw the statue was right next to the veranda railing, practically against it. I could see it shift slightly like it was testing the barrier. My hands were cold and clammy. My heart pounded. I got up from my chair, paced around, then froze when the scraping stopped. By morning, I was exhausted. I opened the veranda door slowly, pushing the chair aside. The statue stood an inch from the railing. The ground was scraped in a long line all around it, like it had tried to move in different directions. I swallowed hard. I touched the railing. It felt sturdy, but now it was scuffed and chipped from contact with the statue. I looked at the statue's face and thought it appeared more aggressive. Its lips pulled tight. I've decided I can't stay here. I feel trapped. Every night it's the same slow movement, the same scraping sound, the same crawling feeling under my skin. I thought I could handle it, but I can't. I haven't slept more than a few hours in days. My eyes burn and my body aches. I keep the TV or music on constantly to block out silence. I'm packing my things now. I don't care if I have to break my lease or pay a penalty or sell the house at a loss. I'm done.
I'm not living with that statue another day.
The idea of leaving it here waiting for the next person bothers me, but I can't destroy it. I'm not strong enough, and I don't want to be near it any longer. In writing this, so I won't forget what happened, I took photos and videos. They're on my laptop. I'll show them to anyone who asks why I'm leaving. If they don't believe me, that's fine. I'm finished trying to convince people. I'm taking whatever I can fit in my car and driving away. The statue can stand there forever for all I care. Maybe someday it will be gone. Or maybe it will stay in that garden, inching closer to the next person who steps onto that veranda at night. All I know is that I'm done waiting to see what happens if it ever reaches me. I found the first letter after I ripped open the old upholstery of a dusty armchair in the living room. I'd been stripping wallpaper and sanding floors for days, but that evening my attention zeroed in on a small bulge beneath the chair's torn cushion. I thought it might be some lost trinket or maybe a few coins. Instead, I pulled out a bundle of letters, yellowed with time, tied together with rough twine. That night changed everything. I'm a straightforward guy. I grew up in this house, left for a while, and came back to renovate it. I had no reason to expect anything more than stale memories and a few creaky beams. My plan was simple: fix the floors, repair the walls, update the bathroom, then decide if I wanted to sell or stay. I never believed in anything supernatural, and I definitely never imagined I would find letters in a hidden spot inside an old armchair. But there they were. A stack of papers with strange messages, some of them personal and sweet, others urgent and unnerving. I took the letters to my makeshift bedroom in the den. It was the only room not cluttered with tools and debris. I sat on my sleeping bag and examined each page under the bright light of a single lamp. Most of the letters were about everyday stuff. People talking about lost loves, broken friendships, and promises they hoped would be kept. They were signed by different names. It felt like I was peeking into the private histories of people I didn't know. One letter stood out. It was on the same kind of paper as the others, but it didn't have a date or a signature. It had a weird tone. It said something about a presence that would wander through the house at night, reclaiming what was once its own. The letter said anyone staying in the house would feel it moving from room to room, especially during times of change or renovation. Whoever wrote it warned the reader to leave before it got worse. There was no mention of harm or what worse meant, just a sense that it wasn't wise to linger. I set the letters aside and tried to calm myself. Maybe it was just some creepy story from decades ago, or maybe someone wrote it as a prank. I convinced myself not to worry. I had a schedule for the renovations and needed to stick to it. But the next morning after I got up and walked to the kitchen, I heard something like quiet shuffling in the hallway. I had no pets with me, no visitors, and no reason to hear footsteps. I stopped and listened. The sound vanished. The house can be noisy. Old boards contract and expand. The wind slips through cracks, or sometimes a floorboard shifts. I reminded myself of that, but my heart was pounding. I went back to work. I spent most of the day on the second floor, sanding the hallway's wooden floor. The air was dry, and the scent of sawdust filled my lungs. Around noon, I paused to wipe my forehead. That's when I glanced over the railing and saw the armchair at the bottom of the stairs. The day before, I'd left it in the living room near the front window, far from the staircase. Nobody else was around. I felt a chill run down my spine. I put down the sandpaper and went downstairs. The chair wasn't just scooted a few inches. It had been moved across the living room through the arch and into the foyer. It was turned toward the stairs like it was waiting for me to notice it. I tried to push it back, but it felt heavier than usual, like it was anchored to the spot. I had to shove it with real force. I got it back into the living room and left it by the far wall. I told myself maybe I dragged it there the night before and forgot. That's how I tried to rationalize it. I went back upstairs, finished sanding the hallway, and cleaned up the debris. That evening I sat in the den again and reread that undated letter. My hands felt sweaty. My mouth was dry. I noticed new handwriting on the margin. It looked fresh, like it had been added recently. The ink was darker, the strokes more erratic. It said, "It's coming again. Don't stay here." I felt a sudden urge to rip the letter apart, but I couldn't do it. I stuffed it back into the bundle and tucked it under a pile of old magazines on the floor. The next few days I kept busy with the renovation to avoid thinking about what was happening. I sealed some cracks in the foundation, scraped off the last bits of old wallpaper in the dining room, and replaced a few broken windows on the ground floor. Every day I heard those soft steps in the hallway. Every day I found the armchair in a new position, once in the far corner of the foyer, another time halfway into the dining room, and one morning it was at the top of the stairs on the second floor landing. Each time, I'd push it back with effort, feeling my muscles strain as I tried to return it to the living room. My chest would tighten, my breath got shallow, and sometimes I'd feel beads of sweat form at my temples. I kept telling myself the same weak excuse. I must have moved it and forgotten, but I knew that made no sense. On the fourth day, I went to buy more supplies. I was gone for about 2 hours. The hardware store was a 15-minute drive, and I took my time picking out paint and fresh brushes. I needed a breather from the house. As I drove back, I could almost feel the tension rising in my chest. I didn't want to walk in there alone, but I had no place else to go. When I got back, I found the front door open. I was sure I had locked it. My heart raced as I stood in the doorway. The living room lights were on, and the floor had faint scuff marks as if something heavy had been dragged across it. My feet felt rooted to the threshold, but I forced myself to walk in. The armchair was in the hallway, leaning against the wall. No one was there, but I could practically sense the weight of an unseen observer. I checked all the rooms, opened every closet, even looked under the beds. Nothing. I walked over to the armchair and pressed my hand against its worn armrest. The fabric felt cold. I tried to pick it up by the backrest, but it wouldn't budge. It felt like someone was sitting in it, but there was no shape, no outline of a body. I yanked with all my strength. I felt my biceps burn. After a few hard pulls, it slid a few inches, leaving fresh scratches on the floor. I stopped. I didn't want to keep wrestling with a chair that seemed to have a mind of its own. I retreated to the den again. The letter was in the middle of the floor this time, not under the magazines. I knelt down and picked it up. More words were scribbled in the margins. "Stop what you're doing. Leave. It will not allow anyone to change what's here." I felt a knot in my gut. I wiped my forehead with the back of my hand. I stared at the letter, expecting the words to shift right in front of me. They didn't change while I looked, but the sense of dread was overwhelming. I decided to do the only thing that felt logical: get rid of the armchair. I spent the next hour clearing a path from the hallway to the front door. I moved boxes, stacked tools, and rolled up drop cloths. The corridor was narrow, so I had to plan each step carefully. I grabbed a small furniture dolly and wedged it under the front legs of the armchair. At first it wouldn't move at all. It felt nailed to the floor. My heart thumped. I pushed harder, bracing my shoulder against the backrest and shoving with everything I had. Finally, the chair shifted an inch onto the dolly. I kept going, inch by inch, until I had it balanced. Then I carefully pulled it toward the door. As I neared the threshold, the chair started to slip off the dolly. I heard wood scraping across wood. My arms shook and my jaw clenched. I forced it over the threshold and out onto the porch. The moment the front legs touched the porch boards, I felt a wave of nausea, like my stomach flipped. I ignored it. I pushed the chair down the steps, letting it land on the grass with a thud. My lungs felt tight. I kept going, dragging it across the yard until I reached the trash area near the fence. I left it there, walked back inside, and locked the door. My shirt was soaked with sweat. My legs felt weak. I took a cold shower and decided I was done for the day. I lay on my sleeping bag, staring at the ceiling. I didn't hear any footsteps that night. I slept like a rock. In the morning, I opened the door and looked outside. The armchair was gone. The spot where I'd left it was empty. I walked around the yard. Nothing. No drag marks. No sign it had been stolen. It was just gone. A pit formed in my stomach. For a few seconds, I contemplated leaving right then, but I had tasks, unfinished, and something in me refused to run. I wanted answers. I stepped back inside and heard a faint scraping sound in the living room. I swallowed hard. I walked in. The armchair was there, sitting in its usual corner. It was turned toward me like it was expecting my reaction. My knees felt weak. I forced myself to approach it. I ran my hand along the backrest. It felt cold and damp, almost clammy, like it had been left in the rain. My mind raced with explanations, but none made sense. I had dragged it outside myself. There was no doubt. I grabbed my phone and recorded a quick video of the chair, the living room, and the corridor. I spoke into the camera, stating the date and time, though I felt foolish. I wanted proof, but I also knew no one would believe it. Who would trust a shaky phone video of a chair in the same spot? It wouldn't show it moving by itself. It wouldn't show how heavy it felt. It wouldn't show the new markings on the letter either. Later that day, I checked the letter again. More frantic handwriting filled the edges, phrases like "it's already inside," and "every hammer swing angers it" appeared in shaky lines. The mention of hammers made me think of the renovations I was doing. Was the presence reacting to the noise and changes in the structure? I moved through the house slowly, checking each room. My footsteps felt heavier than usual. At one point, I heard a loud thump in the upstairs hallway. I rushed upstairs and found nothing out of place, but the air felt thick, like it was harder to breathe. My arms tingled. My pulse was racing. I stood still for a moment, listening, but all I heard was the faint hum of the central air unit I'd installed. The rest of the week, the house felt like a living thing. The nights were almost silent, except for occasional footsteps that I would hear just before drifting off to sleep. I'd lurch awake, my heart pounding, but the steps would stop. In the mornings, I'd find the armchair in different positions. It once ended up in my bedroom doorway as if blocking my exit. Another time, it rested at the foot of the basement stairs. Each time I'd force it back, my body shaking with tension and sweat. I tried to ignore it. I hammered new nails into the loose floorboards, replaced some cracked tile in the kitchen, and painted the dining room walls. But each project felt like an invitation for the presence to make more noise. The letters kept changing. I'd seen new lines appear, urging me to stop or leave, telling me it's not yours. My throat would go dry every time I read a new note. I had no idea how these words were appearing. My mind wasn't filling in gaps. They were physically on the page and dark, unsteady handwriting that I didn't recognize. One afternoon, I decided to open all the windows. I wanted sunlight and fresh air to chase away the tense atmosphere. The rays lit up the corridors. A slight breeze moved through the rooms, stirring dust motes in the beams of light. I felt a small measure of relief, almost normal for a few minutes, until I heard a dragging sound upstairs. It was slow and heavy, like furniture scraping against the floor. My shoulders tightened. I crept up the stairs. The armchair was in my old bedroom at the far end of the hall, facing the window. I stepped closer, my palms sweating. The outside light shone on the chair, highlighting rips in the fabric and exposed padding. Something inside the tier shifted. I crouched down and poked at it. My fingertips brushed a piece of paper. I pulled it out. It was another letter, or maybe a fragment of one. It repeated the same warning. It walks these rooms. Everything you remove, it puts back. Everything you break, it tries to fix. It wants this place the way it was. I stared at those words, my heart hammering, trying to process the implications. Was this presence some kind of caretaker that refused to let anything change? My chest felt tight and my legs shook. I looked around, half expecting to see a person. But all I saw was dust and peeling paint. I wanted to rip the letter and toss it out the window, but I stopped myself. Instead, I stuffed it in my pocket and took a slow, steady breath. I turned and walked out of the bedroom, refusing to look at the armchair again. I marched down the hall, down the stairs and into the kitchen. My head was spinning, but I forced myself to think about my next move. That night I sat in the den with the original stack of letters on my lap. I read through every single one, trying to piece together a timeline. They seemed to come from different people spanning who knows how many years. Each person wrote about this same presence. They talked about doors that wouldn't stay shut, furniture that moved, and footsteps in empty rooms. Some tried to leave but said they were called back for some reason. None of them wrote about any final harm or violence, but all expressed fear and a sense of being watched. The final letter, the one that kept updating itself, had grown thick with notes in the margins. The last edition was brief. You can leave if you still can. It may not let you go soon. That was enough for me. I decided I wouldn't spend another day renovating. I packed my tools, stuffed clothes into a duffel bag, and planned to sleep one last night there before driving away in the morning. I stayed fully dressed with my bag near the door. I couldn't sleep. Around midnight, I heard a slow thumping sound moving down the hallway. I grabbed my bag and stepped into the corridor. The sound stopped. I flicked on every light as I went, refusing to stay in the dark. When I reached the living room, I saw the armchair back in its usual spot. It looked ordinary, but I knew better. I felt a burning sensation in my chest. My heart felt like it was in my throat. Without hesitation, I grabbed my bag, opened the door, and walked out. I locked the door behind me and didn't look back. The cool night air felt good on my skin, but my legs still felt wobbly, so I just kept going to my car. I tossed the bag in the back seat, turned the key, and started the engine. As I pulled away, the porch light flickered behind me. That was the last thing I saw of the house. I don't know who wrote those letters. I don't know if the presence is real, or if the stress of the renovation made me imagine things. But the way the armchair moved and how those letters changed on their own doesn't leave much room for doubt. I never saw any figure or heard a voice talking to me, but I felt it every moment I spent in that house. It claimed those rooms for itself, and it refused to let me turn them into something new. Not going back. I might hire someone to finish the renovations for me, or just sell the place as it is. I'm done trying to fix it. Whether the house wants to stay the same or some presence is holding it in limbo, it's not my fight anymore. I left and I'm glad I did. That's all there is to it. I never planned on finding those film rolls. I was just looking for cheap camera equipment at a flea market one Saturday. I saw a box filled with random photography gear. Rusty old tripods, faded camera straps, a few scratched lenses. At the bottom of the box, wrapped in a thin plastic bag, there were 3 rolls of film. I bought the whole thing for... I figured maybe I'd get lucky and find some interesting vintage shots. I did find something interesting, but it wasn't what I expected. It was unsettling. I can't get those images out of my head. It feels like I opened a door I was never supposed to touch. I developed my own film at home. I'm not a professional, but I set up a darkroom in my spare bedroom about a year ago. I like the process. Measuring chemicals, timing the washes, seeing the images appear like ghosts on paper. It's quiet. It calms me. That day I started with one of the rolls from the flea market. It looked old. The label was partially torn off, and there were some scribbles I couldn't read. I loaded it into my developing tank like I've done 100 times before. The first moment I got suspicious was when I unspooled the negatives under a dim red light. The frames were crisp, like they had been shot with good equipment, but the pictures themselves made no sense. The shapes were too dark to make out in some frames, and a few were overexposed. But I could tell some shots were in familiar places. A park I used to go to, the facade of an old building in my neighborhood. I recognized those spots, but the frames felt off somehow. I hung the negatives to dry, then moved on to the next steps. Once they were ready, I placed one negative in the enlarger, adjusted the focus, and prepared a fresh piece of photo paper. When the first image appeared in the developer tray, my hands started shaking. The shot showed me, at least it looked exactly like me, standing next to the bench in that park where I used to jog. I was wearing a sweater I didn't own, and a pair of jeans I'd never seen. But my face was unmistakable. I stared at the paper, waiting for the details to become sharper. When they did, it only got worse. Behind me in the distance, there was a figure wearing a dark hood, turned slightly toward the camera. I couldn't see the face under the hood. It looked like the person was watching me, or maybe watching the photographer. I set that photo aside. I wiped my palms on my jeans. They felt clammy. I told myself it had to be a trick of the light. Maybe it was a double exposure. Maybe the original photographer used someone who looked like me as a model. I took a deep breath, slid in another negative, and repeated the process. The next shot showed a room I recognized. It looked like the living room of my first apartment. I saw the same couch pattern, the same small coffee table, but the walls had a door where there shouldn't be one. On the far side, near the window. That door didn't exist when I lived there. And there I was again, sitting on the couch, flipping through a magazine. That hooded figure stood in the corner near that impossible door, looking in my direction. I printed another photo and another. Each one had me in it, doing something so casual that it felt creepy. In one, I was standing in line at a convenience store I used to visit. In another, I was sitting on a bench near my old college campus, holding a coffee cup. The clothes changed each time, and some of them I recognized as brand names I've never worn in my life. The background details felt shifted, as if each photo was from a different version of a memory I might have had. That door in my old apartment showed up again in 2 more shots, always closed. And in nearly every photo, that same hooded figure lurked in the background, looking or standing with a slight tilt of the head. By the time I got through the first roll, I felt my stomach churning. I had this urge to stop, but I also felt drawn to finish what I started. I loaded the second roll. Some frames were blurry. Others had a strange color cast, though I was working in black and white. That can happen with expired films sometimes. But this felt more dramatic. Lines streaked through a few images, almost like the film was partially damaged. But I could still see enough details to notice the same pattern. Me, in places I knew, but with small differences, and that hooded figure somewhere in the background. I wanted to drop it all, but a bigger part of me needed to see every photo. I kept telling myself I'd find an answer if I kept going. On the second roll, one photo showed a sidewalk near the convenience store I used to frequent, that the store's sign was spelled differently and the paint on the walls was a dull red instead of the white I remembered. I was walking with a paper bag in my hand. The next shot showed me stepping onto a bus, but the bus number was strange. The route didn't exist in my city schedule. The words on the side of the bus looked jumbled, as if some letters were reversed. I tried to calm myself by breathing slowly. I told myself it had to be a hoax, but the film felt old. The chemical marks were real, and the continuity of these images didn't feel random. Each scene was a place I recognized, altered in ways that made me feel dizzy. Halfway through printing the shots from the second roll, I noticed that in a couple of frames I was actually looking straight at the camera.
I looked startled.
It was as if I had spotted the photographer, or maybe recognized something was wrong. In those shots, the hooded figure stood very close, nearly at my shoulder. I could see one of its hands slightly lifted, as though it were about to tap me. My throat felt tight. My heart pounded so hard that my temples started to ache. I considered destroying the negatives, but something in me refused to quit. I needed to see the rest. When I moved on to the third roll, the images got darker and more distorted. Some frames looked almost normal, showing me in a hardware store I used to visit or at a diner with a friend, though the friend was missing from the photo, and the booth looked narrower than it should be. Other frames showed me in strange versions of my old bedroom, with different wallpaper patterns or furniture that I never owned. Sometimes the hooded figure stood right in the center of the shot, blocking half the view as if it knew I was watching. Core was always somewhere in the frame too, but not always in focus. I saw the top of my head, or my shoulder, or the side of my face. The figure looked like it was leaning toward me, like it wanted to whisper something. My muscles tensed. My mind raced with questions about how any of this was possible. I thought about the possibility that someone had been stalking me for years, snapping pictures of me in random moments. But that wouldn't explain the changes in the environment. And it wouldn't explain how I appeared in outfits I'd never seen before, or how the store signs and bus routes were slightly off. I started to worry about my own memories. I touched my face, my arms. I felt like I might be losing track of what was real. At one point I stumbled out of the dark room. I needed fresh air. I paced around my living room, which looked normal. I checked my hallway just to be sure there were no extra doors. Everything looked the same. My cat, Winston, rubbed against my leg, and I jumped. I realized how on edge I was. I drank a glass of water, trying to calm down. My hands were still shaking. I told myself I was done for the night. But 5 minutes later, I found myself back in the dark room, turning on the red light again, picking up the last few negatives. I felt compelled to keep going. I enlarged another frame from the third roll. This time I saw myself in front of my high school. The sign in front read a different year than I remembered. It was the same building, with the same general layout, but the windows were shaped differently and the parking lot had a strange layout. I recognized my expression in the photo. I looked confused. Behind me there was a hooded figure leaning against a fence, its head tilted toward me as if it were whispering in my ear. I couldn't see a face. My eyes in the photo looked tired. I had dark circles under them. The next photo from that sequence showed me turning around as if I were about to confront the hooded figure. But the figure wasn't there anymore. It was just an empty space. There was a slight blur near the edge, as if the figure had moved at the last second. I printed all of these on fresh 8x10 sheets and laid them out on a table under a white light so I could see them clearly. My breath felt shallow. I noticed small details in each shot. Scuff marks on my shoes that I'd never owned. Cars in the background with license plates that didn't match my city. Some words on signs were mirrored, as if someone had flipped them. And always, that hooded person lingered in the frame, looking at me, or standing too close, like we were connected somehow. I walked around the table, looking at each print. The images felt like they were from different timelines, different offshoots of my life. They seemed to suggest that there were versions of me living out different stories, wearing different clothes, going to different places, and in every single one that same hooded person showed up, either in the distance or right up close. I had no explanation. My body buzzed with adrenaline. Sweat beaded on my forehead and the back of my neck. My heart pounded every time I moved to a new photo. Eventually I forced myself to sit down on a chair in the corner of the room. I closed my eyes for a minute, but that didn't help. The images were burned into my mind. I kept replaying the shapes, the angles, the looks on my face in each picture. I felt like I was being watched right then. So I stood up and checked every window in my apartment. I looked through the peephole in my front door. I didn't see anyone outside. I flipped on all the lights in every room, telling myself I wouldn't find anything strange. Everything was normal, except for me and those photographs. By the time I came back to the table, I noticed something else. In one of the final frames, there was a reflection in a window, like a storefront glass reflecting me as I walked by. In that reflection, I could see the hooded figure walking right next to me, almost arm in arm. But in the real part of the photo, I was alone on the sidewalk. That made me clench my fists. My breathing grew shallow again. I could barely swallow. It felt like the film was showing a reality that was just out of reach, or maybe overlapping with mine in a way I couldn't control. I grabbed the prints and stacked them in a folder. I didn't want to stare at them anymore. I told myself I needed to figure out where these rolls came from. I checked the bag I found them in. There was no receipt or note. The flea market vendor had said something like, "Take it all for $10, and that was it. I didn't even remember which stall it was. It was all a blur. I spent the rest of that night wide awake, pacing from room to room, occasionally grabbing a print and staring at it again. I kept telling myself there had to be a logical explanation. Maybe the guy who sold me the film was pulling some elaborate prank, but every detail pointed to something bigger. The film felt old. The shots seemed genuine. There wasn't any sign of digital manipulation or layering that I could detect. I studied each negative under a magnifier. The images were embedded in the film in a way I couldn't fake with my limited skills. At around 4 in the morning, I finally tried to sleep. I drifted off on my couch with the lights on. An hour later, I woke up sweating and gasping. I had the feeling that someone was in the room. I jumped up and checked every corner, but I was alone. I turned on the TV just to drown out the quiet, but I couldn't focus on anything. I kept imagining that hooded figure creeping around my apartment, waiting to show up in one of my own mirrors or windows. After the sun came up, I got dressed and stared at the folder full of prints on my table. I didn't know what to do with them. I felt like if I tried to show them to anyone, they'd say I was crazy, or they'd think I faked them. I considered burning them, but something in me wanted to keep them. I wanted proof that I wasn't imagining this. I wanted evidence in case something else happened. Now, I'm here, sitting at my kitchen table writing all this down, while glancing over at the folder. Every time I look at it, I feel a rush of anxiety in my chest. The world around me looks the same, but I keep expecting something to shift. I'm worried you'll see a new door in my hallway or find out that my living room furniture suddenly changed. I can shake the feeling that I'm being watched. I haven't gone back to the flea market yet. I'm not sure if I should. Part of me wants to dig deeper, and part of me wants to run and never touch a camera again. But I already know I won't be able to leave this alone. I need to know who took those photos. I need to know if that hooded figure is real. And most of all, I need to know which version of me is actually standing here. I keep asking myself if maybe I'm just one more snapshot on some other roll of film waiting to be developed by someone else. I don't have any answers yet. But I feel that it's only a matter of time before I learn the truth, whether I want to or not.